to close it, you need to hip it. Like, you literally need to, like, full body. So the new one, I had him turn it on. I was like, oh, it's so quiet. Can't wait.
I've had 3 dishwashers go straight up and turn left on me. Terrible. Dishwashers are the bane of my existence that I bought at Bosch, and I love it. I recommend it.
We're getting a Bosch.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely worth the money because this thing's a leak. I had to have my floor replaced. Like, this dishwasher.
That's our story. Of all the appliances, it's the dishwasher we can't get right, and yeah. Oh,
Spend the money once.
that's so nice.
Yeah. You'll love it. I guarantee.
It cannot be worse.
It's really quiet too.
Oh, it's unbelievably quiet. We have to go over there.
Quiet, yeah.
How do you know it's on? There's a red light on the
You're
floor.
gonna have
It tells you it's on.
potential
If you
business
can't-
under
you're-
first agenda.
Oh, I cannot wait.
I forgot to tell you, town council said it was fine if you want to talk
Yeah,
about
yeah.
That way you bang
the
it.
Meadowbrook.
You turn the dishwasher on, nobody can watch TV.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go into too much detail otherwise.
No, we've actually rented in Reading for 13 years. We've never owned.
Refrigerator.
Nope.
My
So we're kind of on a month, so we're a little flexible.
Not small, not insignificant, but just one kind of personal thing I just wanted to bring up. I just learned this a couple hours ago, that Jimmy Mon had passed away. And yeah, I just sat next to him at the select board.
Tuesday, yeah.
And so I just really want to send my my deepest condolences to his family. Just such a sweet man. Really always enjoyed any time I spent with him, and really just got to know him through town meeting. And just so just wanted to say something kind of quick. Just got up and again completely unprepared and off the cuff, but just just such a lovely man. So and such a great member of the community, and someone that obviously cared kind of a great deal about Reading. So again, just wanted to be able to kind of say that, and anyone that's watched town meeting knows who Jimmy Mond is. So again, my kind of deepest condolences to his family. So kind of with that, and again, I'm definitely scattered. Thanks very much, Jackie, for supplying all the information over to me. I know that, and again, I appreciate everyone. Kind of from. I know we weren't going to have this. We may not need to have it, and now we have a packed agenda. So that's just how these things work out. I know I added kind of liaison reports onto the agenda. And and I can kind of we can kind of go around the room. I know in other kind of in the select board and school committee, they just kind of go member to member, and if they have something to share it. If not, kind of move along. And then I'll go last, just so I can collect my thoughts. But I'll just kind of go around the room. If anyone has anything to share, great. If not, then we can just kind of move on, and then we'll get into a better cadence and rhythm of that stuff as we go along. So I'll start, kind of left to right. Joe, anything on your end?
No.
Good. Eric, anything on yours?
Nothing
Jackie?
I attended RMLD, nothing specific as it relates to this committee, but some good info about some of the general managers' recommendations for opt-ins for some non-carbon and renewable funds.
Oh, nice.
So,
Great, thanks, Jackie. Jeffrey, anything on your end?
No, I think we keep conflicting with school committee tonight and
I know,
a week and a half
exactly.
ago, so sorry I couldn't go.
Yep, no,
Can't report
that's,
on where.
and I'll have a little bit, because I did run to the school committee meeting after our meeting, just because I knew they were talking about ARPA funds, so I'll have a little, I can give you guys a little bit update on that.
Nope.
Anything on your engine? Okay,
Nope.
So again, so I'll have a couple updates for you, sorry, I just want to grab a pen. So I did, from the school committee perspective, I did run over there, after our last meeting, you know, they overlapped, and I was right on time. I was the only person that was there in attendance. I think all the other, you know, kind of fun things were already off the agenda, and everyone else had left. But they were talking just about, you know, they're starting to organize, you know, on their end as far as what they wanted to prioritize, you know, kind of recommend from an ARPA perspective. So it was an interesting discussion. You know, again, I think, you know, again, I commend them for starting to try to identify, you know, things that might be important, you know, kind of for the schools. And one of them, you know, kind of specifically, they mentioned adding another school nurse to help with kind of pool testing and things of that nature, which, you know, again, I think it's, you know, kind of in the right spirit, but in such in such an urgent need that they're just going to go ahead and kind of go ahead with it and try to see if they can accommodate it just within, you know, kind of, you know, the existing budget. But, you know, again, I thought good, you know, kind of good starting point, good thoughtful, you know, good discussion on that end. And then I did attend the last couple select board meetings, but I think much of the stuff that they discussed, we either precluded them when we were looking at the warrant articles, and then some of that other stuff we'll go through tonight too, you know, so I can, you know, kind of spare you the, you know, hearing all that from me, because Bob will probably go over some of that too. So cool, so I think, you know, kind of with that, we can go on to the next agenda item, which is looking at and reviewing the remaining October warrant articles. And so with that, I'll just kind of kick it over to you, Bob.
Yeah, that's the document that looks like this that we handed out tonight. It's just being printed right now. The only article that the FinCom had not acted upon was Article 9, which is the potential right of first refusal for Meadowbrook land. That is still an open issue. The board will take that up on October 12th. The board has also assigned one of its members to join a negotiation offline as another alternative potentially came up from the potential buyer to do something else. So it's really nothing that FinCom can vote on, but town council said one thing that you could discuss, or at least should start to think about, is there is seemingly two options on the table. One is for $2.25 million plus some incidental costs. One is for $500,000 potentially plus some incidental costs. And it would be fine for FinCom to discuss, or at least start to think about how to fund those. Because town meeting will be looking for a recommendation on the floor of town meeting. It's already in print, so it's too late for that. And it wouldn't really be appropriate for you to vote something tonight since the board hasn't acted. But at least you could have that thought and have that discussion if you wish.
So when you say 2.25 plus some incidentals, the warrant article says not more than 2.25. So how does?
That may need to be amended because
Okay.
if they step fully into the shoes, there are some other costs that could come along, not large ones.
Okay. Where do we stand with free cash? Has it been certified?
It has not been certified, it's been submitted, so we're waiting.
Okay, so we can't use that.
Maybe
Because-
by the
oh,
18th.
by the
They
18th.
know
we
we
could,
could potentially
okay.
need it by the 18th, so they're gonna try and get it to us.
Okay.
And so, and as I understand it too, Bob, like, as the Article 9 is written, because it's already in, you know, essentially, it's in print, there'll have to be an amendment if it's the first option, or the second, or
If it's
the second
smaller
option.
option.
The smaller option, that's a
Yeah,
better way
someone
to
will
describe
have
it.
to make the amendment.
Gotcha,
You know, unless the board instructs otherwise, the motion would be as it's written,
gotcha.
and then someone would need to amend.
Can I ask a calendaring question? So we
Yeah.
can have, it sounds like we could have a conversation tonight sort of limited to if it were 500,000, what would the funding be? If it were 2.5, what would the funding look like? My question is, if the select board is meeting on the 12th, you said?
Correct.
Does FinCom have another opportunity before the 18th to have it?
We can meet before.
We may have
Yeah, it's-
to.
you have to meet the 13th or the 14th.
So given that really tight time frame, it seems like maybe we should have some, at least preliminary conversation
Yeah.
about how that might look. I kind of hate the idea of it being nights before town meeting and nobody's having any conversation about it.
Yeah.
Or the night of town meeting.
Yeah, we can. always
Yeah,
meet
I think given that
the night
time frame,
before.
I would certainly like to have some broad conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to start it now and then lay some groundwork, and then when we have all of the facts,
Yeah,
come,
yeah.
you know, the night before, or the night of, and again, since probably most of us are town meeting members
Yeah.
anyways, I think, I'm pretty sure. So Joel, yeah, so, but, you know, so again, with the majority of us, I know Mary Ann is too. So, I mean, we can, you know, we already have that kind of circled on the calendar that we'd be there for it. And so if we just did something slightly early to do a vote.
That makes sense.
That's, and I know I haven't done it in my time as, on FinCom, but that's been a pretty regular thing, hasn't it, Eric, to do something like that?
To meet.
Right, prior? Yeah, night of.
It's done.
Yeah. So, you know, so kind of given that, I mean, again, I'll kind of throw it out, I mean, you know, again, I don't know if anyone wants to share any thoughts as far as, what types of, you know, kind of funding we'd look to, you know, to explore or to discuss around, you know, Meadowbrook.
And I guess question for Bob, like, is it public yet, like, what the town would do, like, with that land? Like, is it like considered like a buffer for the town woods, like, or?
You know, the board has discussed things last Tuesday, a couple of nights ago, different members of the public spoke, including the conservation chair. I don't think there's a definitive single answer for that. There's just been ideas put on the table, if you will.
Could we maybe chat about like each option? Because they're very different sums.
Yeah.
So maybe start with the 5. I always like to start with the smallest.
Exactly.
So I feel like that's an easier.
Yeah, tiptoe into the pool.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
easier not to crack. So if we were looking at 500, I have to say my mind immediately goes to free cash, even though it hasn't been certified. We know the balance has been healthy for years. That feels like a very reasonable sum. And this, to me, is kind of that unicorn thing. An unusual circumstance that comes up quickly, needs to be acted on quickly. Do you have the money in the bank account to do it? This feels very appropriate to free cash. So my question is, if it isn't certified, that's not an option.
It's not an option, it's not certified, but they are trying to get it set up for us. They do know that we are looking to potentially use free cash.
This is a tactical
Anytime
procedure.
I've dealt with DORs and they know that we have a town meeting coming, they're going to bend over backwards to get
To
it
make
done.
it happen.
So unless there's something that's unforeseen that happens where our rep is out unexpectedly, or if there's somebody higher up who has to do the certification and they're out, they pretty much said they thought that they could get it done.
So that's great news. As a plan B, is there any way that we could, with the town meeting in November, kind of punt on the funding and say, you know, we approve this general concept, we would like to bring this article back in 4 weeks when free cash will definitely be certified?
I can answer that. Some of that I can't answer because it's part of legal negotiations.
Okay,
So the answer is maybe.
Okay.
But even aside from negotiations, there's 2 other paths I can think of. One is the stabilization fund has that amount or more, so it could be used.
okay.
It could be used for any general municipal purpose. It's, I don't know, $1.7 million or something.
Mhm.
And then another alternative is to approve debt, and we could borrow temporarily until there is a solution. And that's a little awkward. We
Yeah.
haven't done that in 15 years since I've been here, but we used to. So it's at least, it's kind of an emergency option if you really have to do something.
Sure.
And that depends on when the buyer or the seller needs to be paid.
And then it becomes a little bit of an accounting thing. I certainly don't know how the rest of FinCom feels, but I would suggest if we use the stabilization, like first of all, hopefully free cash is certified if free cash is the choice. If not, I like the idea of using the stabilization fund with the understanding that we immediately replenish it. Like we take the money from free cash to replenish it. I would not want to draw down the stabilization fund without a commitment to immediately replenish it.
When's the last time we went to the stabilization?
I don't think we've ever used
I don't remember.
Not in the 10 years I've been here have we ever
Yeah, I can remember 2 deposits, and I don't remember any use, honestly, I might have forgot. I just don't-
And that's two-thirds, right?
It's a 2/3
Any funding of this, as I understand it, will require a 2/3 vote, even free cash. To buy real estate requires a 2/3 vote.
I didn't realize that.
And how much is in the stabilization roughly, or?
1.7 million.
Oh, that's, sorry, I missed that, okay. But the rest, like, how would it make up the difference with this?
This is just for the smaller
She's
purchases
talking
for
about
now.
the
Yeah.
smaller.
So
Yeah,
we
I
would-
think they're
yeah.
different. In my mind, they're different. How you would
Because
fund
we
them is
couldn't issue
different.
debt for the smaller version, like, we couldn't go out and,
But,
oh, we could for that amount?
you know, let's just pretend that for some reason, free cash would be available at November town meeting, but not in October, and the buyer, seller rather, need to be paid right away. We could issue a 30-year note, a 30-day note.
Oh, just like
And
short
just
term?
repay it.
Yeah, okay.
Town meeting in November would agree.
I mean, but that also could be part of how that negotiation settles off too, as far as, you know,
Yeah.
that could be a point in
It will be.
the, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, so I think that's,
But there will be a way to buy this in October town meeting, the smaller amount,
Okay.
without too much trouble.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Yeah, I like the way that, I mean, again, I think that, that sounds like a feasible, you know, kind of path,
Yeah.
stabilization and then replenishing afterwards. Any other thoughts, questions?
So what do we get for the 500,000? Did I miss that?
One of the 5 lots.
One of, just the one that's, we're thinking about turning into parking for?
Yep, that's, yeah, from what it sounded like in the, yeah, that's the same one. Out of there's 5 lots, and it was,
5 lots from 2 1/4. I mean, so the 500,000 is a little bit more than 1/5 of the 5 lots, right? And my understanding is that one's actually has some wetlands consideration, so it wouldn't be buildable as buildable as the others.
Again, you're not voting on the amount because that's being negotiated.
I see, okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and we need to be a little bit careful because there's some ongoing negotiations. So I think this is more of a broad, if the select board were to recommend 500,
Yeah, okay,
and in
all
3
right.
weeks, we were in the position as a FinCom of saying to the town meeting, how are we gonna fund this? We're sort of having a broad, how would we fund this conversation?
Yep.
With no votes and no commitment, just a conversation.
yep. Well, just, yeah, again, laying some groundwork. and then,
Yeah.
From that perspective. And so, Bob, if you look now to like, you know, kind of the fuller picture, how do those options, you know, like, what options are available to us at that point?
We wouldn't have, the stabilization, you couldn't do the whole thing. You could use a good chunk of it.
Yeah,
And then, you know, as same things, free cash, some short-term debt until there's free cash, or debt. You probably wouldn't borrow permanently for 500,000, but you might for 2 1/4 million, typically we do. I think your policy suggests that's about the number that we borrow for,
yeah, was it,
But less.
it's, yeah,
like $1.5 million.
$1.5 right, that's what I thought, okay, yep.
And even though it's not as, in the warrant as a debt authorization, the motion, I've already got it from bond counsel, it can be turned into that, depending on what your wishes and town meeting's wishes are.
Can you talk a little bit about what that debt would look at, like how many years?
I haven't really given it a lot of thought, not too long, 5 years.
Yeah, it should,
offhand.
okay, yeah, okay. But it sounds like it would be debt. I actually,
Well,
let
I
me
mean, we
rephrase
could
that.
use 1.5 million out of free cash and, you know, and
Yeah, you can
whatever the
comp.
balance out of debt or something, or, I mean.
Oh,
borrow,
right, you
know,
could do a
go ahead,
combination.
If 1.5 million is what we typically borrow, so borrow 1.5 and then fill in the rest
I
with
wanna-
free cash, or, you know, what, it's some mix,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we have a lot in free cash relative to the 7%
Mhm.
threshold that FinCom asked for, right? We have, I mean, we expect to have in excess of that, right?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think my instinct is if we have to go out for debt at all, I'd almost rather do the whole thing as debt. And the reason is different priorities. I actually agree, we have a whole separate conversation to be having about free cash, because I
Okay.
agree with you completely. But where this project kind of came out of nowhere, it's an unusual circumstance. I'd want to be careful about prioritizing, because once you say, oh, we're going to take $2 million out of free cash and spend it on this, I kind of want to look at the capital plan and be like, well, there's other things we could be spending it on.
Okay.
So,
Right.
but no, you bring up a really good point. That's fair.
Yeah.
Another thing to consider is this, I don't know, a handful of debt articles before this one will come up that potentially should be voted. I wouldn't really want to plan on borrowing a small amount of money in total. It's not economically efficient. But if any of those or all of those debt articles are approved, then debt is much more cost effective to do, let's just say.
You just string them all together.
Yeah, there's a certain startup cost to issuing debt, no matter how big it is.
Yep.
And you want to make it worthwhile.
Yep.
And with interest rates where they are, I could certainly see the argument for we're borrowing X amount anyway, let's tack on a little bit extra, because for all of those reasons, the efficiency, the low interest rates, particularly if, and this is a different conversation, but particularly if we're looking at free cash and looking at some other projects that might be a year or two out, and saying we'd really rather use free cash for those, that's, but this is all gonna have to be decided for the 18th.
And even if it's not, free cash isn't certified by then, you know, Sharon and I know what she submitted. It's kind of mind numbing. Certainly could say so by then, even if it's not certified, give you an order of magnitude. Don't want to do it tonight, it's just large.
Yep.
Yeah.
Another thing is we'll probably know about the 12th because our DOR rep is going on vacation on the 12th, so she's gonna try and get it done before she leaves. So I would hope we know
So
early
that
on the
helps.
18th, going on in advance.
Great.
Great. Any other questions, comments on the items in Article 9?
Karen?
Oh, hey Karen, sorry.
Is she muted? Oh, that's fine. It looks like you're talking.
I am muted. I'm sorry, I don't know if there's a hand raised button on this version, but thank you. Hey, it was just a quick question. Bob, how did we end up buying the Zani land when that came up out of nowhere?
I think we use sale of real estate fund, but that's almost depleted. There's not very much in there.
We did use it.
Okay, thanks. I don't remember. Thank you. But it was another, these opportunities do just come up and
Yep.
we've got to turn on a dime.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Cool. All right, good. I think we're good. So now, yeah, so that was, is that the only item
Yeah,
for
that's all
October?
for October. yeah.
Well, for October? So then,
Just have a town meeting every month.
Let's not.
no, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, the, and actually, just how, just kind of popped in my head. Where, is it only scheduled for one day for October, or do we have it?
We've reserved rooms for 2 days. I think there's a reasonable chance it could be 2 nights. It'd be the Thursday, whatever's after, the 18th, 21st. November town meeting, a second night would be Veterans Day, so it won't be the Thursday, it would be the next Monday.
That's what I
Is it
thought.
not gonna be a Zoom meeting?
Well, it's gonna be hybrid, so, yeah.
Okay. So we'll be present at the auditorium and then.
Probably in here, but
Okay.
we reserved the auditorium just in case.
Oh, people want to be there.
Because in the past, we've allowed or encouraged people that didn't want to Zoom to go there. And then Alan and some staff at Jane is in the room behind us.
And where, will FinCom be just Zoom or?
You can,
Yeah, we-
you can ask them if you want to go to the high school auditorium, the pack, you could. I don't think we could fit you in this building adequately. The room behind me usually has 4 or 5 as the town clerk, moderator, 1 or 2 other people. We can't fit you all in there.
Okay.
I don't know that we do this room maybe with Zoom. It's possible. Maybe be a Zoom participant all from this room. Or you could just be individually. It's an interesting question because you might need to speak as a group that
Yeah.
night.
Well, yeah, we just talked about meeting ahead of time,
Yeah.
so where
Well,
would
they
we do
could
that?
have a Zoom meeting as well.
Yeah, I mean, you could come to this room just like now, and that could be town meeting on the screen. Because that's,
Yeah.
behind me, that's what town meeting looks like to folks in that room. Town meeting's on the screen. Do you see any problem with both rooms going?
I don't think there would be a problem with both rooms. We operate the other room, we're all with headsets and our computers, and there's 4 of us.
Yep.
Actually, there's 3 of us. the town clerk, myself, and Alan, and then we have a screen like that, and we see the pack
Yep.
or whoever's speaking or whatever screen is shared, so we have the view that everybody at home sees up there, and so I monitor that, we all have multiple monitors and so forth, so I don't think it would be huge, we would just, it would add a little level of complexity, just because we'd have to work with RCTV to make sure that you were mic'd up in here, so that, because it's a channel that's
Yep.
managed through RCTV, so that people at the PAC can go to the mic and speak. So it's something we would need to start talking about.
So everyone's on their own mic?
In there, we are all headsetted and using our own mics, like if we're on our own individual kind of Zoom calls, we're muted, talking to each other procedurally. That's why you always hear me come on and say, use the chat for this, use the Q&A, like that kind of stuff. So, but we're operating in our sort of our closed, we're not in a hybrid environment. It's like 3 people on a Zoom call, so it's very quiet, unlike town meeting. We're talking about, that room is very quiet as we run it operationally. Whereas in a hybrid environment like this, you would act as a board here, and you would have to be mic'd, and RCTV would have to go, but that office right there is full of RCTV equipment.
That's what you'd look like on the left-hand screen.
Yeah,
Now, there'll be 180 other screens, potentially, for people.
But on town meeting, when you, on Zoom, we're not on,
They
we're
want
not
the
on camera.
Yeah.
I think if town meeting is asked questions, or you wanted to speak individually, you probably would be, it'd be different.
yeah.
It's not been very often where town meeting as a body is asked questions during a town meeting, because you already discussed it, but this potentially could be one time.
I'm having a hard time seeing the value of this room. I can see the argument for Zoom, and I can see the argument for being in the PAC. I'm having a little bit of a hard time of where this room, like I think we're in person or we're not, but if we're in person, it feels like the PAC is a more easy to
Yeah, I'm fine with
manage.
that. Yeah.
There's usually plenty of room at the back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Two
Usually like
people.
one or two
Well, yeah.
people.
Yeah, right.
Or at least
And the
the
count
last
from the
couple.
pack,
Are we-
two.
So Gina, are we gonna be needing a ride too? Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah, we will.
but typically, no, we just tested it as if, we made sure that it was available. We had to make sure that that in-person option was operational. So we just did that, and Alan appointed Mr. Cook to be his alternate moderator there, so.
Yep. I mean, I don't know how everyone else feels. I actually agree with Gene. If it's either, and not to, and again, and not to make it, I don't think from an execution perspective, we need to make it any more difficult than it already is. And again, because I fully appreciate that this is not, it's a little bit of a high wire act. So, and so from that perspective, I'd rather just either Zoom it or, and if we're gonna be in person and we're gonna, because we can still meet Zoom wise too, but,
Yep.
and so I'm fine, kind of doing it from that perspective. And if we did do a meeting ahead of time, we'd probably similar, we'd have a hybrid option,
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, and I'll probably remain in my office, because it's important that I'm near Alan if he
Yep.
needs something.
yep,
But it doesn't matter, I don't think, functionally where you are.
No, I think we could probably work with the most amazing team. So, not to put too fine a point on it, not myself, other people. We have a great team, so that was something that was important to you to be able to do that. If you felt
Yeah.
to deliver your mission, you would make it happen.
yeah, something to think about. Again, I'm just happy to be in the pack. If we had to do it, if we wanted to do it in person.
Yeah, my inkling is to be in the PAC, but I'm an in-person person. Like, that's just my bias. I'm pretty comfortable with whatever the group wants.
Anybody have any, kind of, preferences?
No strong point of view.
All right. Well, maybe that's something we can just kind of, as that gets a little bit closer,
Yeah.
we'll figure that piece of it. That's good. I'm glad, I'm actually, I don't know how that came up, but I'm glad we,
Jeffrey.
Yep. Yeah, okay.
no, that's good. I appreciate it. All right, so then we, now we're on to the November, warrant, correct?
Wanna go-
Yeah, and I'd suggest you have your guests in first, the Volkswagen is in the hall,
Yep.
so Charlotte and I.
All of
in the
them.
back, yeah, 640 people.
Perfect.
So that's Article 7.
Didn't realize we were
get them, or I'll get it over.
Jane, can they sign in just so I have all their names?
Yeah, but
I will ask them to sign.
All right, thank you.
All right, folks, come on in, if you wouldn't mind, please sign in so that we will have your name for the record.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm just putting Northeast, is that okay?
So you
It's up to you.
said, Bob, Article
Not
7,
everybody
but
is
that's
bound.
not in any of these handouts that we have? Is that-
No, it's in something I emailed the warrant for
Okay.
November. What I handed out is changes from what we emailed only.
It's just so
Okay.
we have it for the record.
Yeah, private
I
passes.
think, yeah.
Here's a welcome.
Hey, Bob, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Where should we sit?
Right here.
Oh, wow, thanks.
You have a seat at the table.
Hi,
Wow.
how are you? Hi, how are you?
Hey there.
Thank you so much.
You look a lot heavier.
That camera adds 20 pounds, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, 40.
It's got a multiplier effect.
We just never look at it, so I mean, we have to take your word for it.
Scooch over a little so Kevin will have some room there. Peeking at Mr. Rossi's.
Nothing exciting, nothing exciting at all. I
Just
wish,
numbers.
I'm just trying to find the article so I can have it. Cool. Great, thanks everybody for coming in. We're looking forward to hear from you.
Great, great. So if I can start, I just want to do some quick introduction.
Sure, that's great.
Start on my right. Kevin Nigro from PMA. He's our project manager for our project. Dr. Scazzarella, principal at Northeast. I'm Dave DeBerry, superintendent of Northeast. Jay Pacone, our finance director, and Charles Lyons, who's our consultant on our project and on a lot of other different things. So we did bring a big team, and our school committee rep, Mr. Bob McCarthy, sent his regards. He apologizes he was unable to make it. He had a previous commitment. So we brought a big team. I know you have a long night, but I really just wanted everybody to get to know us a little bit more. You know, Reading has always been very supportive, even though we don't have the largest number of students coming. Jane has worked with us over the years, and Bob has also been a great advocate for your town. He's always, whenever something's been going on, like our project, he's always stayed involved. He was at our breakfast when we started this whole project, and we really appreciate being partners with Reading. So I'm going to turn this over a little bit to Dr. Scazzarella, because one of the things I really like to get across is what each individual town really gets the most of from Northeast. And although we feel that your regular day students do very well at Northeast, and we're glad the numbers have been growing and that students have been taking advantage of Northeast. We've recently been awarded a grant, and it's about a Saturday program, and it's a program that's attracted a lot of Reading students as well as our night schools. So I wanted Dr. Scazzarella to talk about that a little bit, and then I promise we'll jump right into the numbers and the important things.
Thanks for having us here tonight. So we just recently received a $300,000 grant from the Cummings Foundation, which a big chunk of it is located in Woburn, and then it's pretty much spread out all over. I'm sure you're all familiar. And it's a 10-year grant, so it's $30,000 a year. That's the way we've chosen to break it up, and that was the way I applied for it. 5 years ago, we got a $100,000 grant for them that I split up over 4 years at $25,000, and we started a Saturday program. And basically what we do is we offer our shop program to any students in any of our 12 communities who want to try out a career path, want to give an opportunity for them to come in. So they're in 4-week segments. They come for 3-4 hours, and they get a little certificate at the end of each grouping to show that they've done, say, 16 hours in carpentry or 16 hours in design and visual. And it has become very popular with the Reading students who maybe go to Reading High School or maybe Austin Prep or, wherever your kids go beyond Northeast. And we actually had a student in our very first year of the program from Reading, a senior at Reading High School, who came and went into our design and visual program because he thought he wanted to be a graphic designer, but he had run the gamut of whatever the courses were at Reading High. So he liked it so much, the little mini program, that he signed up for the other 2 sessions so that he could continue learning. And he told us that he definitely cinched it. This was his major for college, and it was great. So if we can offer that opportunity, we're really happy to do that. We're very happy to have students from all of our communities. We started off with just seniors, knowing that a lot of times in high school, kids don't know for sure what they want to do, and they're not always sure they want to go to a 2 or 4 year college. They might have a career path in mind. So we've given kids the opportunity to kind of explore that and try it out. Our carpentry program is very popular, the electrical program. So they get the basics. And then we decided to offer to any age group, 9 through 12, and we've had a few kids transfer in as sophomores as a result of the experiences they've had in the program from varying communities that we serve. But basically, it's just an opportunity. It's free. Last fall and winter, we provided a bus for a number of the communities. I think we had 3 buses going in 3 different directions so that students who wanted to come but couldn't get there, we could get them there. So it's a great program. We're really happy that we got this sustaining grant now, and we got $5,000 extra each year. I put that in as the transportation, basically, to be able to pay for buses for kids. Your kids are kind of far. If their parents can't get them there, they can always get on a bus. So it's a wonderful program. It just shows the extent that we can go to support students, regardless of whether they come to our school or not. It's important for them to have every experience possible as they're trying to make decisions for their future. So that's our grant.
Quick question just on my end. So you mentioned that that's popular. Like, how does it break out? I don't know if you know, like from a percentage basis, like as far as given the other communities, as far as our participation on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. We've even last year with the pandemic, really school pandemic year, we had over 120 students in the program. And there's a large chunk that come out of some of the cities, Revere and Chelsea. I think Reading, it could be the 3rd or 4th highest group that comes. They just seem to be looking for something to do too. And we've had quite a few kids come in the health assisting program who are interested in being nurses. So they get an opportunity to learn. Basically what we do is we run a little bit of our 9th grade exploratory program. The 9th graders rotate through every shop for a week, and then when they go back to shop 2 weeks later, they're in a different program. So that's basically what we do with this Saturday program, and we're actually starting it up early this year in late October, early November, so that we can offer more options for our students.
So we got 51 applicants the first week we sent out the email, which was amazing. And like Carla said, the key is it's on Saturday, and that works because we know a lot of students Monday through Friday playing sports, doing other activities. And I think parents love the idea of, instead of sitting around all day on a Saturday playing video games or, working part-time, maybe if they don't have to do it. But Kyle was right that Reading stood out as being, initially, we were very impressed that so many Reading and also Winchester students were interested. And, even if a student is going to college, we think it's a great experience because a lot of our shops can be a college track level program like architecture and robotics, and it's been a great success, and we just want to share that. We're not just a one-stop partner with Reading, we also have a night school program that we have a lot of students who come in from all of the 12 towns, primarily Wakefield, North Reading, Reading, in those areas. So we're trying to really help everybody. And so we wanted to just share that with you.
No, it's fantastic. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Awesome. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lyons, and he's going to start the ball rolling with our presentation on our new school project.
Let me start by saying I'm a lousy golfer. I mean, I'm so bad that when I retired, I spent 28 years as the superintendent over at Shawshene Tech in Billerica, and have worked with MSBA on 3 different projects. And I spent a lot of years actually in Arlington, as Bob will tell you, Jane will tell you, as an Arlington selectman. So I've been dealing with municipal finance my entire life and the intricacies of how it works. And because I'm a lousy golfer, I joined Meadowbrook down the street. And I can't beat anybody that lives in Reading, or if I beat anybody that lives in Reading, you know, they investigate it. So I'm here tonight to basically support David in his school committee, and I've been doing that. And I'm working with a few other school districts right now, Diamond Regional, which is down in Fall River, and in Bristol Plymouth. And all 3 of these schools are in the MSBA stage of being funded. The good news is, 2 weeks ago, August 25th or so, the Mass School Building Authority signed an agreement with Northeast Folk Tech. And Northeast was awarded the largest grant in the Mass School Building Authority history, $141 million to help pay for their renovation. And the reason why the grant was so large was because of the makeup of the district. This is probably a district that is the greatest melting pot in Massachusetts. The fact that 49% of the students who go there live in 3 gateway cities, i.e. Chelsea, Revere, and Malden, helps generate such a significant amount of grant money from MSBA. The bad news is MSBA is behind the times in terms of recognizing actual costs, and you're aware of that. You built Reading High School, you built a number of places. Construction costs for school districts, believe it or not, in Massachusetts since 2012 was up 120%. And it's up 120% because of labor. There's not enough electricians and plumbers and carpenters. There's not enough vocational technical programs in the state. The reason why Northeast was accepted into the MSBA program was 2 reasons. Number one, it has the largest wait list in the state. They can only accept 41% of applicants. Right now, they have 1,281 kids. They're going to build a school for 1,600. Of the 1,281 students, 33 full-time students from Reading go to that school. The hope is to build a school for 1,600. They're going to add 3 new programs. And they went through an exhaustive process with MSBA, and they've been led by 2 excellent firms, PMA, of which Kevin Nigro is the principal here, and also DRA is the design firm. They just finished Cape Cod Tech down in Harwich. The bad news is the total project cost is about $317 million. So when you subtract $146 million from $317, you come up with an assumed cost to member communities of $176 million. That's allocated equally based upon a per pupil basis. So each community is going to pay based upon their October 1 count the year before. So in your case, your share of that project is, if you divide 33 by 1,281 kids, that's your share. You bond that $176 million over a 30-year period, and you bond it intelligently. You don't bond it tomorrow, because it's going to take some time for the project to be built. In other words, assuming that the district gets support from its 12 communities, and we're hoping to get support from the 12 communities over the course of the next 60 days or so. Particularly, what we're looking for is a non-negative vote from the local appropriating authority. There's some towns won't call a town meeting. A town like Winchester has 10 kids going there, so they probably won't even call a town meeting. But assuming we get no negative votes against the action the school committee took on September 9th, within 60 days, then the action of the school committee will be confirmed. So our hope is your support for the Reading town meeting. I think you have at the town meeting November 8th. A positive action, a recommendation from you to that town meeting is of critical importance. We have a bunch of stuff we can give you, and I don't want to bore you with it, but a lot of the information we've shared with Bob and we've shared with your leadership, the select leadership, over the course of the last several months. We've sent 3 different project updates that PMA and others have worked hard to sort of keep everybody in the loop, so to speak. There's been an intensive lobbying effort that the district has put on to acquire additional state aid. In In December 2 years ago, we were able to get an amendment through the state budget with the help of your state rep, Brad Jones, and with the help of Bob DeLeo. They worked together on a piece of legislation that raised the reimbursement rate from MSBA by an additional $25 million, i.e. lessening the burden on member communities. We're still working with MSBA. We're going to share with you a letter that the superintendent and two of his colleagues sent to MSBA asking them to reconsider some of their policies. I'll give you an example. They award an assumption for technology costs for regional vocational technical high school at $1,200 per pupil. They use the same figure for an elementary school. Doesn't make any sense. So a lot of the existing policies that have been cast in stone for the last 5 or 6 years haven't kept up with inflation. And MSBA, unfortunately, is capped because they only have enough revenues that are generated with 1 cent off the sales tax. So if they accept 11 projects, and they estimate they have enough money to do 11 projects, they have to have policies where they don't blow the piggy bank. So we respect that and understand that. There's been a recent effort in the 5 mayors from the core cities that make up these districts have co-signed a letter asking for another $300 million from the American Rescue Plan Act funds to minimize the cost of member communities. We're not sure that's going to happen, but we've been very supportive of that. And I know the superintendent's having a legislative breakfast on October 15th at school to continue to ask for that. We were on a phone call yesterday with Jason Lewis, the Senate Chairman of the Education Committee, discussing the logic for that. But to put the numbers in perspective, Minuteman Tech in Lexington was constructed over the last 3 years. The cost of that school was $144.5 million. The state grant was $44.5 million. The cost to the member communities was $100 million for 628 students, about $160,000 per pupil in terms of capital cost for the facility. They then went out and they did another bond issue for $6.2 million to renovate their fields 3 years later. This project is coming in at $317 million, an assessed cost of $176 million, approximately $110,000 per pupil for the bed, for the cost of room and board, let's say, at that facility. Cape Cod Tech was done a year and a half ago. It's having its grand opening, I might add, this Saturday. That facility came in at $120 million or so, $121 million. The cost of the member towns is $75 million for about 650 students. So the construction costs are not out of whack to what they obviously cost. The MSBA grant is the largest in the state's history. The impact on the communities, although it's significant, is not as significant as the cost of the last 2 or 3 regional voc tech schools. Your cost will be, over time, will go up to a high of $263,000. That won't hit you until fiscal year 26. And the reason for that is because the architectural firm, PMA, the operation project management firm, as well as Hilltop Securities, same financial advisor that Reading has, the school district has, they built a financing plan that makes a lot more sense. They're going to do bands the first couple of years, and that's a decision of the school committee. And they won't really do a major bond issue, won't be impacting until fiscal 26. And that's because most of the construction is going to happen a year and a half from now. There's still 9 months to design this school. The reality, though, is they need your support before December of this year. There's a 60-day clock. And the 60-day clock from MSBA, and I guess it's regional agreement, says that once the school committee takes an action, and the school committee has to take an action after the MSBA signs its project and scope agreement, which was done in August, the school committee borrowed the money on September 9th. We had a meeting in the parking lot down in Northeast because they had a propane gas leak and they had to cancel school. It was not planned.
Yeah.
It was not planned.
It rained as
It
well.
rained as well. So we had it in the park without coffee.
Without coffee.
And the school shut down for, it's an old building. All of these regional vocational technical schools, and there's 26 in the state, they're the envy of the country right now. They serve 200 communities. They were all built between 1964 and 1977. They've all come of age. They need to be built again. Technology's changed, student learning styles have changed, programs have changed. You know, robotics was something different when I was 22 than it is today. And that's what they're doing well at places like Northeast Folk Tech. Greatest wait list in the state. I think the superintendent, the school committee have done a great job acquiring $141 million. It's not going to stop there. We're going to give you a packet, and Jay Pacone put these together, but I always knew this from my work before, that if you give people this information before you're allowed to speak, nobody listens to it, right? Huh? So, I
I'm not
want
gonna
to
say it sounds like marriage.
It sounds like that.
Like, I can't wait to
We
get
have
my hands
enough
on it.
packets for your entire finance committee, okay? And I think the important
Thank you.
ones are, you're gonna see letters in here from the superintendent to MSBA complaining about the MSBA funding process. You're gonna see letters in here from the mayors complaining that we're not getting enough state aid to help with this project. But the only thing I wanna go over with you right now is the first 3 pages, okay? The first 3 pages. Because you're in the finance committee, and I know this from my experience in Arlington, the most intelligent people in the community serve on the finance committee.
I want to see your next,
I am-
I want to see your next meeting where you say to that next committee.
No, because you're the fiscal watchdogs for the community. You're the ones that have to put it together and live within Proposition 2.5. So I respect the job you do, as everyone here should. For the way this works, this shows the borrowing schedule assumed by Hilltop Securities. They assume a 4% interest rate on bonds, which is much higher than it currently is. So we think this does not assume premiums being used yet to reduce the debt, what the school committee's going to vote to do. This assumes a band rate the first year or so of 3%. We wanted to be conservative here, because if we came in as liberals, Bob would have killed us when we met with him 2 weeks ago. He would have said, you know, you're not being conservative enough. This is a conservative projection. It's based upon current enrollment. You could go up or down, and it will change every year based upon enrollment. The seats at the table will be paid the same from Chelsea as the same from Reading, okay? And if we do get additional state funding, our hope is to reduce your cost as well as everybody else's cost on a per pupil basis. This shows you the impact in Reading. We got support from the North Reading Fiscal Advisory Committee the other night. We met with the Wakefield Selectmen the other night, got unanimous support from them. We're doing this town by town and city by city, slog by slog. There's some highlighted information in here on a few of the pages that will show you what the process is if we have one negative vote. In the state law, it's Chapter 71, Section 16. We put that information in here. If we get a negative vote, then we're going to have a popular vote. The popular vote should happen sometime, we think, in January or February. It will be run district-wide. It will be an election to be at least 4 hours, no more than 8. That's a decision for the regional school committee. They'll have to pay for the election cost, and they'll have to do this in concert with the town clerks. We bluntly think that's a waste of money, because we think it's going to increase the project cost, and we think the project's going to pass. We've seen a referenda in the Minuteman District pass with 70% of the vote. Cape Cod Tech was required to go referenda by regional agreement, and they did so, and they received over 74% positive vote. These projects are popular by parents and taxpayers, and we tried to bring you a project which was respectful of your ability to pay, and we're doing everything we can to reduce this cost to not only this community, but the other 11 communities served in the district. So I hope you support this so I can start working on my golf campus and I can do this next year. And it's a pleasure for me to be here.
I don't know if anyone has questions, or we could go all night, by the way,
Yeah.
but I know that,
No,
you know,
Bob,
you have
yeah,
an
Bob.
agenda.
No, Bob, so you had,
Yeah, thanks. I saw Charlie and Jay and with Jane a couple weeks ago, and we had a cantankerous meeting, certainly. 140 million of support from the state is great, the rest is not great. And I'm going to step outside of what I usually do and probably should do and ask you to support this. not my role, but there's only usually 20 to 35 kids in Reading. That isn't a big popular number, isn't very visible. So it's easy for this kind of thing to slip past everyone in Reading. Voc education is critically important, I think becoming more important. As Charlie mentioned, we have the same financial advisor, the same bond counsel, and so I've also spoke to them about, is there a creative way Reading can do something, not just follow in and borrow money if we don't have to borrow, for instance. So, is there a way to front load, understanding that the enrollment every year is different, and so our costs are unknown. But so we'll work on the creativity part. Rather than paying $250,000 a year for 30 years if we don't need to borrow, but they do. We don't know that that's an option, but at least we were talking to the right people. I have met with the state senator and 2 reps and asked for, Charlie mentioned $300 million. I think that's for 3 Voc schools, so $100 million each. We've asked the same question. I know there's been testimony open with, I think it was today. And the $100 million is from the ARPA money that the state has. They have a big chunk of ARPA money, and they are looking for projects, and this is an eligible one. None of us can say what will happen or whether it will happen, but I'd have to say this is a pretty good use of money, and I have a pretty good idea that some amount will be added to the project to reduce the local costs. So, I hope FinCom does give it some good consideration, and it's not a lot of kids, but it's really vital. And I didn't know about the weekend project opportunity. That's nice too. Oh, that's really nice.
In the hearings tomorrow, we're actually, we're on with the mayor of Melrose, the former state rep, and David and I are going to be on with him at the hearing tomorrow between 11 and 1, so that's
Yeah,
right.
and then a bunch of the mayors and managers met for breakfast and talked about this, and there's tremendous support for it. It's good.
Well, and I do know, just, kind of, it's not necessarily a question, but just, kind of a statement. I do know, in sitting in some of the school committee meetings recently, that in what, kind of we're looking at as a town is, the impact of the pandemic. And, I think one of the things that's kind of come out of there is, are there other types of, kind of programs that we look at, from a local community, and a lot of it is kind of circled around, kind of vocation. So I think that's, kind of a testament from what, the school and what it offers. So, I think from that perspective, the other thing that I'm, kind of, that I've looked at is that the fact that you're looking at it, more than the pupils that you have today. There's a little bit more of a forward, kind of look to this than just, hey, we're just trying to get, to do what we're doing today. I do think that, kind of given everything else that's going on right now, there's, the need for, more individuals with, kind of trade experiences is needed. So, again, really, you kind of appreciate the thought and the kind of forward thinking as far as what you're looking at from this perspective too. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
A couple questions. So you talked about the 4% debt thing, but you're not going to bond that out until a couple of years from now.
Right.
So we have to be conservative
Yes.
because it might go up. It might go up beyond the 4% by the time we
Let's
bond
hope
it out.
not.
Okay.
We'll try.
Fine. You mentioned the wait list and that you have a lot, but you also mentioned that you're going to add 3 programs. So do you expect that by adding those programs, you're now going to increase demand beyond the 400 students extra that you're going to be able to add with the expansion, and then be back where you are in terms of
Well,
wanting to expand further?
correct me if I'm wrong, they're expanding space in existing programs as well as adding 3 new programs. So the capacity of the school will be able to serve 1,600 pupils instead of 1,281.
Right, so we're talking about 400
But that's a
people on
great
the wait
question.
list, right?
My prior position at one point was a special ed director, and I would do an intake meeting for all of our IEP students, which is, again, a very high number, and it's something I don't talk about at this meeting, but at our operating budget meetings, that, we're close to 30% of our students are on an IEP or 504 plan, which, as you know, is a very, very high number. But what we found is students don't particularly come for program-specific reasons. I think they come for vocational education in general. And I think, we try to offer, programs that lead to competitive paying jobs that are out there. And we've closed some programs because we found that, all we had to do was go on Indeed and find out there were no printing press jobs. I think there were 8 right before, in the entire state before we closed it down. So with the programs we're bringing in are very similar to some of the programs that exist, like we're bringing in marketing, which is similar to business tech, but a little bit of an offshoot. So it would probably attract the same type of student. Medical assisting, which we have health assisting, which is more of a CNA program. Medical assisting is more working in the office or working in the lab. And then biotechnology, which is really our first kind of breakout from a hands-on. And that was based on, we had done a lot of surveys with, prospective students and incoming students. And that was something, because of the 128 belt and because of, even more against because of COVID, the attention on biotechnology, which is also an offshoot. But we don't expect that they would bring in separate types of students.
I can imagine the biotech might have
Yeah.
some students that would traditionally have gone through,
Right.
college, biology or,
Yeah, similar to our robotics program as well. And the most important thing to understand that, again, we share is we never want to replicate a Reading High School program. Reading High School is a great school. And if, when we give our pitch, the point is to come for a vocational program, not to leave Reading because you're not happy with something about the academic program. So, robotics and like biotech, for a long time, you had to go to college. And then recently with robotics and automation, the automation technician position is huge because they come in from California, they install these amazing automation systems, they go back to California, and then something small goes wrong. So you only need a high school certification. So biotech, we're seeing a lot more entry-level lab positions that you can come straight out of high school if you have some training. So that's our hope with the biotech. But I did want to plug that.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned the Saturday programs. Is there a wait list for that too, or are you able to handle everyone?
No, we can
Okay.
handle a pretty good amount.
Right, so we
Of
could hold
kids.
1,300 during the week.
Yeah,
So
But staffing wise, you wouldn't be able to help all 1,300 on Saturday?
you'd be surprised.
Yeah? Okay.
Our teachers love the Saturday program.
Okay.
They just, I don't know if it's the freshness of students coming in and it's new. And also Cummings Foundation has been amazing. They come and they visit. They offer more money than we ask for sometimes. So I feel pretty strongly. And we always do have the option at some point. It'd be great if we don't to use operating budget money as well. But knock on wood, we haven't had to so far, which
And
is.
the allocation for the town of Reading is based on on the regular Monday to Fridays?
Yep,
right?
there's
Not on
no
Saturday.
extra
Okay.
charge for night school or for the Saturday program. Saturday program, by the way, has over the night school has over 1,300 students during the course of a week.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, go ahead.
just a general question. Definitely support vocational education, just to, as I go through a couple of quick questions. So the baseline, you're saying would be 33 students, but that really applies for 30 years.
Yep.
So, like, what's been like the rough average for the Reading, like, participating students? Anyone?
25 to 35, I think. Is that right, Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah, we gave Bob the
So that-
7-year.
So that's.
Yeah, we went back 7 years and averaged it out. And we found that other Voc schools that expanded or built new school, even though they brought in more students, it was still consistent with the percentages historically. And Essex Tech was a great model. So we don't expect all of a sudden that Reading would be, have the most students going to Northeast and then you'd be saying, oh God, where are we gonna get the money now? This wasn't expected. It's been pretty consistent.
Okay. And then I guess Monday through Friday, like if students go up to 1,600, hopefully.
Yep.
Yeah.
Then, like, would you expect operating to go up one to one, like
Hope-
33%?
Hopefully.
So there'll be an added
Yeah.
cost in the long
Yep.
run, like, okay.
Yeah, another point that, again, you know, the Student Opportunity Act was slated prior to COVID to be very beneficial to Northeast. We still did receive some funds, but our hope is that the operating budget would actually be more palpable as we have an increased Chapter 70 allotment from that Student Opportunity Act. Again, it would be the inner city, gateway cities helping bring down the cost also to Reading, because we will get more money from that as well.
And like, not that this would have happened, but what happens if there's like overruns on the construction side? Like, how's that flow down?
Kevin, this is a perfect, I'm glad.
Wow.
That was
Yeah,
my
you're over here for a reason.
So,
It's called value engineering.
so Charlie said he wasn't gonna give these out, so he didn't look first. I think Jay and I are gonna give our notes to Charlie first,
Yeah.
so that he doesn't hit all of our talking
Yeah, that's
points.
right. Stole your speech.
He did, but he did a good job. So we've built a budget around a forecast of when we're gonna do early packages of construction and when the bulk of construction starts. And within the budget is an owner's contingency and a construction contingency. And it's been forecast to the midpoint of construction. So we believe we have it captured.
But I think the other issue, you talk about value engineering, the project will not cost more. In other
Well-
words, go ahead, if the
I
construction.
don't want to talk, so the good part in having a talented building committee, very engaged school administration, I'm lucky, this is my second technical school. We didn't have to do any value management to get to a project scope and budget. Throughout the 3 phases of estimating so far, the PDP, you've had MSBA projects, I believe. The PDP, the initial feasibility studies, the 2 of them, then schematic design, we've been able to stay on our budget. So we have a list of value management items in case of emergency break glass that we'd have to pull out in another phase. But by being good stewards of the dollar and keeping our eyes on what's going on in this marketplace, we feel comfortable that we have any additional construction costs covered in the contingency. And we do have a value management list should it be needed. Right now, our value management list would have no impact on the educational plan. We hold that as, that's the goal. We design the building around delivering the education through the educational plan. Anything on value management would be the nice to haves, not the have to haves.
So you do, so it sounds like you have room, but like, worst case scenario, though, it still hasn't gone out to bid though, right?
No, it hasn't. We're a ways off.
Yeah.
We've been at this since August of 2019. Our project scope and budget, which allows us to go and get the votes, was just a month ago. Early packages, this is construction management at risk delivery method, which allows us to keep developing our plans, finishing them to 100%. We'll put some early packages out to try to stop some of that cost escalation. We would like to be out with an early site package in June of next year, where we'll start the clearing and site prep in advance of the foundation work. So it's another way to save project dollars and contingency and try to avoid some of those extra construction costs.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I had the exact same question, and just to push on that a little bit, so that all sounds wonderful, but there is a worst case scenario, like even despite all of that, I assume it just goes back to the districts. There's now an overrun and you vote to fund it or not.
So we will negotiate a guaranteed maximum price, it's called, with the construction management firm. We have chosen Gilbane Construction Company. And again, within that guaranteed maximum price, we will include a construction contingency, a soft cost contingency, and a general contingency
Okay.
that will take into account market factors, supply chain, and how far along our plans are developed. We don't want to start until we're at least 90% designed.
Yep.
To eliminate some risk. So we'll put all the belts and suspenders in place. Could something terrible happen, like COVID happened?
Right.
But we were able to manage through that in a lot of our projects with use of contingency, with basically some things come in under, some things come in over, and on balance,
Okay.
we're going to be on budget. There is no more money. We're holding to the budget as advertised, the 317 million.
Okay.
And that's it. We're sticking with it. We're not coming back. We can't. We have a project scope and budget with the MSBA that we did scratch. When we started the PSI, we were down at around $116 million. And we were able to scratch up to $141 million with the MSBA, but that's it. So again, we're going to go into design development. As soon as we have the drawings to develop to enough phase, we're going to estimate it again. We'll adjust fire then. If we have to go to value management at that time, we will, but we will not exceed 317. We get into construction documents, we're going to estimate again at 60% and 90%. So we have a lot more checks and balances to go. Each time we do an estimate, we'll go to the district, we'll go to our building committee and say, if we're on or off, then this is how we'll get to it. But we,
I think the big picture thing too is it's taken us 6 years to come close to getting unanimous approval. If we come back and try to get 12 more towns to approve even a penny,
Yep.
it's not going to happen.
Correct.
So Dr. Scazzarella and I will probably have an office on the front lawn and sacrifice that first before we ever even think in a million years to say, oh, we better go back to 12 cities and towns because we need more money. We'd cut a lot. We would have to make it work. I can't see ever coming back for more money.
That's helpful.
And again, maybe it was in some of this material before, are you, is it at a different site? So like, are you gonna be, are you, and I don't know if you already mentioned that, sorry. So,
No, we didn't.
So you'll be able to kind of keep running and then you'll just kind of transition over to a new site?
Exactly. So across from the current building, we own about a mile going back to the main street or Palm Street. And so it's gonna, our site cost was a little bit more than what another school would have been, but we don't have other land like a regular town in another school to temporarily use.
Yep.
So we're gonna clear the area, and then where we are right now will either be a field or a part of a parking lot, but we hope there'll be zero interruption to the current students, and that was big as well, because if it takes 4 years to build a school, we don't want somebody to go through their 4 years of high school living, on a work site and never getting to have the reward.
it also preserved construction costs by not having to pay for temporary classrooms, trailers, all non-reimbursable by the MSBA. So we wanted to stay away from that.
So do your electrician voc students get to help build the school?
Yeah,
No, but they're gonna make a great salary if they graduate.
So as part of the technical, I was lucky enough to be the project manager at Essex Technical High School, 17 sending communities up there. And we included the kids from day one. From the design team, we went to classrooms, we did lectures, we invited them to the job trailer. We had just about every trade on the site at some time to observe construction. And then at the end, we did run into some, that you get the change order prices that I don't want to do it, electrician price. And we called him the magic man, the electrical constructor. We went down and said, would your kids like to run a couple of outlets to the fields that they missed? And he said they'd love to work in their own school. So we bought the supplies. They provided the supervisions. The kids trenched it themselves, piped it, ran it. It was inspected. It was a great opportunity for the kids to help. The other teams got a little upset because they didn't get to do anything. We decided to build the shed. The carpenters built the forms, placed the concrete. Everyone helped build the shed. So there's all kinds of opportunities like that. And Gilbane's a really good partner in that as well. Safety Week, kids came out, different shops, different iterations, and they took place in fall safety. Put them up on a ladder, threw them off with the harness on, taught them how it worked and all that. So great question, a lot of opportunity. So we'll take advantage of it.
That's awesome. I'm so happy that you leveraged that, because that's really a once in a
It's fun.
50-year opportunity to actually build your own school. I have a question about interest rates. I'm a little surprised that you're tranching out the bonds, given the interest rate environment right now. Can you talk a little bit about the strategy behind that?
Well, they're not gonna need the money right away. In other words, I think the first year cost is probably gonna be about, I don't know, was it 50 million? What did we borrow, 80 million the first year in advance, then anticipatory notes?
Yep.
The majority of the money isn't going to be used until fiscal year, let's say 24, 25. That's when you major construction. So you borrow money when you need the money, and you've got arbitrage issues as well that you've got to be careful of. You can't go borrow money and stick it in the bank and make interest on it.
Yes.
So it follows
All
those
right.
types of arbitrage rules as well.
Fair enough.
And we need to thank you for your AAA bond rating, I believe, because
Well, double it.
that,
Matter of fact, I looked today.
Yeah, we tried with AAA.
Double A.
What it
We're,
says here.
we're extremely
well-
proud of that AAA bond rating.
Yeah, don't confuse them with North Reading, that doesn't go well here.
Don't over money that's in this
Do not make fun of any
Sorry.
town, they haven't had their town meetings yet.
Yeah.
But every community in the district has at least a AA bond rating,
Yeah.
including Chelsea. I might add, and I don't know if he's listening, I hope he is, Chelsea's stabilization fund is $27.4 million. Their free cash is 12.3. And they just got a $25 million COVID grant. The communities can afford this school district. Their debt ratio to budget's the lowest of the 12 communities, about 4.8%, I might add, Bob. So every community that wants to support this budget can support this project. And we're hoping we can get them all.
I just have one, this is actually a comment. I really appreciated what our town manager said about possibly, for Reading, a different financing mechanism, maybe paying more upfront. So I really appreciate your openness to that. I would just encourage you moving forward and working really collaboratively with the town on some flexibility and creativity in terms of funding.
Yeah, and that's going to be up to Bob and the bond council, and obviously Hilltop Securities. If we can work something out, that'd be great.
Great, thank you.
That's beyond our pay grade. And by the way, I've enjoyed this town manager for a long time and respected him. I used to work with Peter here for years, and he's just done a terrific job for the town of Reading, and I'm going to miss him.
All right, well, let's talk now, Bob.
All right, thanks. One other thing that they can't say, but I need to point out to you, there's been a number of students, especially in recent years, going to Minuteman or to Essex. And, at a much higher cost per pupil than in Northeast. So there's the potential with a new school that may stop, and I'll just leave it there.
That's a good point. I do have one more question. Right, this one's for Bob. If sort of the plan in front of us is $250 a year for a very, very long time, what does that do to the capital debt plan, the 5% FinCom policy? I mean, are you comfortable with this moving forward in terms of our overall debt capital picture?
Yeah, the way I would look at it, since we have the accommodated cost approach, it belongs there somewhere, obviously. I imagine it as just a Voc school charge, not in the debt capital.
Oh,
Because they're passing through an invoice to us, if you will. Now, I don't know legally what might happen, but I don't believe, I see the way the article is written. We're not going to really authorize debt and borrow, right? They are. So I assume they give us X charge for the kids, X charge for the capital.
Right.
Yes. Another district this year, as Sharon has talked to you briefly about, hit us with a capital charge we didn't even know about. So it's just going to probably come that way, and I would imagine we treat it just as a Voc school expense.
I'm glad I asked. That wasn't what I was envisioning. Thank you.
And the town meeting votes a majority vote. It's not a 2/3 vote. Thanks a million or a quarter of a million.
Any other questions from anyone on the committee? I know, Karen, I can see you jumping through the screen. I can see you, Karen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. So this was a wonderful, unexpected surprise, and I am so excited, and thank you all for coming and presenting all this great information. I'm Karen Herrick. I'm the chair of the Reading Select Board, so, at least one select board member was watching, and the rest of us will catch up on Zoom, I'm sure. And I also had a chance to talk to Senator Lewis about this, and he wholeheartedly felt like this has been a robust process, and he's very excited about this project, and functionally it sounds wonderful. So still just wanted to thank you for coming to speak with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for
All
taking
right,
the time.
thanks
Really
again, and
appreciate
look
it.
forward to everyone coming up to visit.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
actually,
Gotta go get breakfast.
I would love that.
Yes.
Not in the parking lot.
Yeah, no, I know.
Nice to meet you all.
Very nice to meet you. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Good Charles. Charles.
Ciao. Just don't call me late at night.
I would never.
We don't usually have guest speakers.
I know.
That felt very,
Right?
We were usually-
great to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good night, Sharon. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good night, folks.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Jane. Good to see you.
I'll see you around, I'll see you at town meeting.
Definitely.
Never get.
We don't always have guest speakers.
Well, she gets to leave.
I know, we're usually the ones horning in on someone else's meetings, but this is nice.
Yeah,
This felt good.
exactly.
We feel important. I feel a little bit important. Thanks for arranging that, Bob. That was really interesting. A lot of interesting factors. It was really worth it. I really
And
think.
again, it's not something that jumps out at a lot of residents.
No.
No.
It's just not a very visible thing.
And that last point you made was a really interesting one. The cost per pupil for that, for Northeast versus the others. So that's interesting.
And do we know the rough breakdown of the 3 voc schools, like how?
Well, I guess there's 33 or 5, I can't remember it here, and there's less than 5 of the other 2, I'll say each. In
Okay.
some cases, 1 or 2. Those schools are really hard to track. They don't tell us, they should know legally on October 1st what their enrollment is. They don't tell us even until May or June, when they finally send invoices, so it's just hard to follow them. And Northeast bills, I don't know what the right word is, they know their enrollment, and then next year is when they bill you for those amount of kids, a full year later. The other ones you pay more live, so it depends how many kids are there. Your Northeast, since we're their district, we're not going away. They have 33 kids this year, that's what we'll pay next year, for 33 kids. Next year we have 35, the year after we pay for 35. The other schools are live, so whatever they have that year, you pay for that year. And that's one of the reasons it's hard to know how many students are at those other schools. But, they're typically 20, 25, 35 grand a kid, depending on the program and the circumstance. And I want to say the Voc schools, 12,000, something like that. It's just order of magnitude less.
Question, is the choice among those 3 voc schools based on what program the student wants to pursue, or is it more?
That's complicated.
Yeah.
They have to prove that Reading High doesn't have whatever program they want. And then they have to prove that Northeast doesn't have it if they want to go out of district. And let's just say there's been some creative marketing by all the vocational schools in creating a name of a program no one else has in order to get the students to go. So,
Because I guess if you have 400 kids on the wait list for
They don't
Northeast,
have-
then those 400 kids would love to go to some of these others if the others have the space, they would love to have the kids come in.
yeah.
For sure.
Excellent.
Ready to go back to the warrant?
So what's the, what else do we have on?
There's about 3 or 4 articles. Article 3, this is something that I handed out tonight. Gene and Ed and I met briefly earlier. This was not in something that was emailed to you earlier, at least not all of it.
Yeah.
So you can see on Article 3 that we have added today $400,000 of capital to spend at November town meeting. That's $150,000 for road repairs for DPW. They could spend almost an infinite amount. $150,000 for recreation to start a Birch Meadow master plan design funding. Some of you may have heard some of that at the select board meeting. The chair of rec, Emily Sisson, did a great job today, sort of in parallel with some things I was trying to struggle through. And we came up with $150,000. And you'll see in the capital plan, there's 3 specific items that are highest priority that will start to address, including, I guess, restrooms is the highest priority. And then lastly, $100,000 for extra sidewalk repairs. And I'd say the Birch Meadow is probably the highest priority, and the others are, when you see the free cash number, we're gonna wanna start doing things with it. And I don't mean to step out of line with another couple $100,000, but as anyone that's in the town knows, we desperately need to fix our sidewalks and roads. So any amount of money you can put into that will always be helpful.
I thought a little while ago you were saying that people were calling you up and saying, please don't repair my road.
We have heard some of those calls, yes.
But there are enough of them that are in poor shape that
Yeah,
people want
I'll
them.
give you an example. Lowell Street out in front of Town Hall down to 93 needs about $900,000 worth of work. In the capital plan that, you know, you probably haven't really looked at for next year, I put in, I think, 400,000 just for that road. And then we're gonna have to find 500,000 from the other sources of funds that just come up every year. And that's, you know, that's not a neighborhood road, so there really won't be either support or opposition. It's really a cut-through road more than anything else. So, you know, as I say, you know, we usually put 600,000 in, the state puts in 600,000. Not every community puts in any money other than what the state gives them. As a cut-through town at a major intersection, we just have way more than residential use and wear down. And the state aid formula for us does account for some of that. So, you know, we get 600,000, that's higher than we would be if we were out in the country somewhere. So the ones that have sometimes said, please don't do my road, are very small, isolated examples.
Okay.
So that 400,000 is new, not something previously discussed or that you've seen, you know, prior to today. That's currently the only capital plan change from what is going to October town meeting. Not to say that something couldn't come up, but, you know, we made a bunch of changes in October that imagined that would suffice for November unless something happened. Article 4, if you want me to just keep going through.
Yeah,
it
just keep
before you
going,
come
yeah,
back.
definitely.
Article 4 are budget amendments. Some of this, in fact, almost all of this, I didn't know in time for October. I'll just go through line by line, and this was in your packet. It's also in your handout tonight. Our workers' comp number came in actually 20,000 lower than we had budgeted, but our property and casualty number came in 65,000 higher, both from my meeting with them, with Jane. I think it's in 2 weeks, try to understand it. But it looks like both numbers are new baselines. It's not a one-time thing, it's a baseline. Not surprisingly, and you'll all see it, insurance costs are going to skyrocket because of the pandemic. It's not a direct thing, but when you think of the supply chain, inflation, and going on, you're just going to see insurance costs go up. You know, one of the recommendations I might make to my predecessor, which we have not done for many, many years, is to go out to bid for some of these insurance, just to see what it is. I know Chuck Robinson from now the school committee had advocated for that in the past. We did it for health insurance 2 or 3 times, Maya won it each time. It didn't seem like the workers' comp and property casualty needed it because it was a relatively low and tame number. It might be the right time in another year or 2 to do that. So the 20,000 to the good, 65,000 extra, and then 400,000 extra for capital, as I just described. And for public safety department, the health department's now in there. We ended up hiring a full-time public health nurse in addition to a part-time health nurse. We had only budgeted two part-times. The full-time health nurse just also got her master's in May. We hired her in January part-time and then converted her to full-time. She's way busier than you can even imagine. And nicely, she has also branched out to do a lot of other work like website and other things that, you know, a nurse typically would not do, so she's being very supportive. We are outsourcing all but one of our full-time health inspectors, so we're keeping one full-time in-house. And we're outsourcing the part-timers we had that work nights and weekends, which is harder to find. And we can save 24,000, but it's going to cost us 10,000 to do it that way. So the net result is we are spending a little bit more on health. It's mostly rearranging. I was reluctant to do anything until we got a new health director, but it's just been hard to find. We're going to do another round of interviews in 2 weeks, and I just didn't want to leave this open until April town meeting. And then some of you may have heard the Town Forest Committee and DPW both asked for $50,000 to do some thinning up in the town forest. So the net of all that is a use of just over $500,000 of free cash. And then, as I mentioned previously, we moved some capital around in water and sewer, but did not fund it because I was afraid if free cash is not available, then neither are water and sewer reserves. So I was fairly certain they would be for November. I wasn't sure about October, so this is where they would be funded. 400,000 in water and a couple $100,000 or so in sewer. happy to stop there and answer any questions.
You mentioned that because of COVID, the insurance costs were going up. I would have said from COVID, I would expect to see health insurance premiums go up, but then Article 4 for the special town meeting shows health insurance premiums going down, $375.
Yeah.
So how do we explain that going down?
Sure, health insurance, it probably in the long run, or maybe the medium run, will go up. But to date, usage is way down because a lot of people are not doing routine health exams. And that, in the long run, that might be worse, both medically and financially. But for now, they're not.
Okay.
So last fiscal year, Maya gave us a 2-week holiday, so they refunded 1/2 of a month's premium. And this year, they refunded a whole month's premium. So that's in the general fund, $700,000-800,000. It doesn't change the baseline though.
Yeah.
So we can use it, $300,000 for one town meeting to have some available in April if needed. But we have to be real careful to understand that that doesn't reduce the forward-looking run rate.
Yeah.
It's still 800,000 higher than what it's going to be this year, plus whatever inflation we see.
And then how much of the property insurance do we feel is like due to like climate change and the hurricanes that are dumping, large amounts of rain?
I don't know, that's a really good question. It's
I would think that
definitely
might
been storms.
be playing more into this property insurance
Yeah.
increase than COVID.
Yeah, part of it is increased assets, increased asset values.
Yeah.
So the library was, clearly, but that wasn't
Okay.
just this year, that was previously. Believe it or not, when we do a new sewer station, that becomes more expensive.
Yeah.
Nobody sees that, but so some of the capital projects you see have an implied insurance
Insurance,
cost.
yeah.
It's not
Okay.
huge, but,
Yeah.
maybe $2,000, $5,000 here and there. I'm not aware of, as I'm sure you know, the school committee liability insurance, there's other pieces of insurance, and the rates of inflation there are high, but the actual dollar amount is not huge. I think their insurance is maybe $30,000 or $35,000, so it's not a big number.
Okay.
But there's a lot of components to property casualty. Again, you're right that the insurance companies are being pummeled by storms.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a storm in Reading,
Yeah.
everyone's gonna pay. So, yeah, you're right about that. Anyone else want to ask anything about, especially the new capital that I
Go ahead, Karen.
just threw in?
But I'll wait until FinCom members go.
Go ahead, Karen.
Thank you. I just had a thought. And Bob, thank you for putting in the town forest request and DPW request. I was just wondering, getting back to Jean's comment earlier, we were talking about options around the town forest. And, some things coming out. The last list that FinCom approved included $100,000 for improvements in parking on Stroud Ave. And since then, an open space plan, which may have some severe restrictions on that, has come to light, going back there. So I was just wondering if that gave us a little flexibility in terms of spending. And also, if town meeting chooses to take action on the warrant article regarding to Meadowbrook, what kind of flexibility would we have to maybe, put a hold on that particular, would it have to be on the town floor, or would just the project not be done? It was an amount of $100,000.
Yeah, first of all, there were statements made the other night that were not factually accurate. I'll start with that, just to be real clear. But the $100,000 is not on the table right now. That's a next year budget request. So there is no immediate ask for that. It's in the capital plan. It will be part of the budget process next spring.
Gotcha, and forgive me, I'm looking in the packet, I couldn't find what you have, so you may be looking at a handout, and so I'm sorry.
No, we definitely discussed the 100,000, especially because it might be an alternative to some of the need or desire for the Meadowbrook land. I know Mark said do both. Everyone has different opinions, but the 100,000 wouldn't have come up in discussion really until the budget process this winter, except for that fact.
I think, so maybe this 500,000, if that was the total number, I don't know that I have that in front of me, so these are like subsequent town meeting adjustments that will be made versus going into the budget next year, just
Just talking about the free cash, the
No, free cash, I think the free cash.
Yes.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just don't have that in front of me, so I'm just trying to figure it out. Thank you.
sure.
Any other questions from anyone on the committee about,
Yeah, just quickly, like the water main and the sewer, like projects, those were capital projects that were already like on the list from before, is that?
Not these ones, well, yes, the sewer station project has already been approved and there's a shortfall. Technically, that's really just replenishing a contingency fund, which is going to dry up very fast. The water main work is a little bit new. It's, they started to do work in the Emerson Ave area, and this is to finish the job more properly with what they found. So it's kind of a mix on the answer, to your question. And then the flushing program has nothing to do with any of that. It's just moving it up 3 years because they found a hydraulic model has told them, you gotta start doing this 3 or 4 years sooner. I hope that answers.
Okay. But like, there, just like across town, is that, or?
The flushing program is townwide. The others are very specific to single locations.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
and is there any color on Article 5, Bob?
Yeah, how much is it? There's one past bill that Sharon brought up.
$52.19.
Yeah, it's $52. So.
We want to take a can? And just,
I don't know that that's legal, but
No?
faster.
Okay. Yeah, it might be faster.
Can't do that, but
No.
it'd be nice, but enough.
We're just exploring our options, Sharon. Just exploring our options. I'm glad you can keep us on the straight and narrow, though.
And then the last one for FinCom is Article 7, which you just heard about from the vote school.
So I forgot to put the amount on the background, so.
Yeah, and you told me, but I didn't add it because it didn't seem to be critical. This has been on for a while.
Okay.
So again, FinCom, should vote on Articles 3, 4, 5, and 7.
Has the select board voted on these yet?
These are for
I
the
mean, they've
November.
closed the warrant, and these articles are all in the warrant.
Okay.
And then it's up to them whether they do or don't want to support articles or vote on them. For a little while, years ago, they did, then they've stopped for many years, and then recently for October, they did vote. So it's whatever their pleasure is.
All right, and then we're gonna wanna go ahead and do our votes. Do we do our votes now then, Bob?
Yeah, you should vote them tonight. I mean, it's possible you'll meet again before November town meeting. If you're not comfortable voting tonight, it's not urgent, but if you vote tonight, it will definitely be printed in a warrant report.
Right.
Depending on when you next meet, it may or may not be printed.
So I think the next time we meet is the financial forum, right? And so that's in between.
Yeah, and I think
The
that's
20th.
the 20th, and I think we talked about it, Caitlin and I talked about it today, that we go to the printer on the 18th.
Yep.
But if we do it in-house, we could potentially let a few days slip. Caitlin did this one today. November shouldn't be much different in size, so it's possible. But, it really is whether you think you have more information forthcoming and want to wait, or whether you just want to vote tonight. The plan was that you wouldn't have to meet again until the financial forum.
Right.
And therefore, you should vote tonight. But because of the right of first refusal, you may need to meet. But if you do meet in, let's say, the night of town meeting, you're not going to want to have a lot of things to do.
Exactly, yep.
So what additional information would we get between now and next?
Well, you
meeting?
know free cash
Free cash,
potentially.
for sure. Okay.
We might find more reasons to spend money. This sort of never ends. For instance, on the roads, DPW asked for, I can't remember, it's either 400,000 or 500,000, and I said, that's just too much. But you could ask, and you would say yes.
So they asked for, instead of 150,000, they asked for 400,000, in addition to the 400,000 they already had.
Yes.
They wanted another 400,000.
They wanted to be able to finish Lowell Street this year and next year instead of next year and some year in the future.
Okay.
So,
And kind of a newbie procedural question, is the certification information that we might have in subsequent meetings because of the DOR
Yeah, I mean, it's not,
certification?
yeah, they were waiting for a
Okay, got
certification,
it.
so if I've made any mistake in my calculation,
I see.
or misquoted.
Right, okay, thanks for that.
Yeah, and I'd say there's a 100% chance you'll know in advance of November town meeting, and a
Right.
reasonable chance it'll be ready for October.
Any other questions? I mean, from my perspective, I don't, I'm okay, you know, kind of going through and doing a vote on these now. I don't know of any of them that I have, you know, a reason to pause on them. I don't, but happy to.
So I feel the same way. I think Bob's was a fair question. Is there any more information I would need? And I'm not thinking of any. This feels pretty comprehensive. So, but again, I agree with you. If anyone on the committee wants to wait,
Yeah.
that's fine too.
Yeah.
Are we proposing then to also proceed on the Article 7 on the book as part of them?
So one option would be go article by article,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We could kind of look at each article and make a decision.
Yep. All right, well, so let's
So
start.
that's 3, 4, and 7?
Yep, 3, 5, 2.
3, 4, 5.
Oh,
Five is the,
That's the $52 bill.
5 to
Okay, I think we're,
$52. That one we may want to
Yeah.
wait on.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I want to see that bill.
Like more documentation.
This sounds like something we talk about like at the table.
Seriously.
So, who used that data? So on, let's go through article.
Want me to do a motion?
Yeah, if I can get a motion on
Okay.
that.
Bob, is it sufficient to say as presented?
Yeah.
All right, move to approve Article 3 as presented.
Second.
Thanks, Eric. Second. You can just do hands. Yes!
yeah.
There we go. I love it.
Just give me a minute. I want to make sure I don't have the other questions. Sorry. I wanna move
So but I think this is good. I mean, the Birch Meadow redesign has been going since my kids were about yay big, and you know, they tore down Imagination Station. So I think this has been a big thing for the public, although it needs an L in public services there.
Oh, yes.
And I have to,
Frequent error.
to that point, it seems to me, I don't remember the timeline, but the rec committee just presented to the select board like super recently, 24 or 48
In the
hours?
Spring.
Oh, no, no, I mean like the
Presentation,
most recent, like
But not financially oriented. And then it was discussed Tuesday night.
Tuesday night. What's
Tuesday night.
tonight? Thursday? Yeah, 48 hours ago, and it sounds like the rec committee like incredibly quickly worked with
Well, the
town.
chair did. I don't think they could meet. The
Yeah.
chair worked
Yeah.
hard.
I just
No.
want to acknowledge that. I
Yeah.
think that to move very quickly to get us a number for design
Yeah,
study,
she did a great job.
I really appreciate that.
No, yeah, and so, definitely, just, open it up for any kind of questions and comments around, kind of Article 4 before we vote, definitely.
Article 3,
3, sorry.
no worries.
Oh, yeah, it's because I got the wrong page. No, again, and Jeffrey, to your point, I think the community response to, the Birch Meadow master plan has been consistent and resounding
Yeah.
in its support. There's so many different, pieces of it that, supports, kind of, whether you have kids that are yay big or fully grown. I think it kind of cuts across a lot of the community.
I guess another, Bob mentioned that the DPW asked for more on road repairs. Did they ask for more for sidewalk?
No.
So they asked for 100 and you gave them 100
Yeah,
for
I
sidewalk.
said, can you use 100 or more? And they said 100 would be the most we could use. And then I
Okay.
actually asked for something called crack sealing, and they said, no, we can't use any more money, because they have a bandwidth.
Yeah,
So
okay,
much
all
work
right,
they
so,
can do.
because that seems like, pedestrian safety, something that like,
Yeah.
yeah. If we could do, if free cash is as big as we're, as it might be,
Yeah.
then, then that's something that I would say, let's,
Yeah.
maybe
Sidewalks
borrow
are
more,
money.
but- Okay, so I'm good with.
Any other comments or questions? Let's go to the
This
vote.
might be totally,
Oh, go ahead,
you
Joe.
flip-flop, you shut me up, but, like, what, ongoing maintenance, because I was lucky, we finally had our street repaved about 4 years ago, but, I noticed, like, walking roads leading into it, like Covey Hill Road, it's already cracking, so,
Yeah.
is that, like, how do we, like, support, like, maintenance of that, and the sealant, like, the stuff I don't like to look at, but I know it's good for the long term, right, so.
Yeah, I haven't seen a presentation internally or at the public in a long time, so I'm going to do it from memory. there's 3 or 4 kinds of road repairs you can do, from sort of cosmetic to really fully doing it. And it's definitely both an art and a science as to figure out how to use your money most effectively. And yet not help everyone. So if you're just doing it purely financially, the most cost-effective solution is to hit a road just before it becomes really bad. And you could spend all your money every year on just those roads. But you would never hit the really bad roads, or the roads that are not terrible, but could need some help. And then there's the question of, neighborhoods and size. You'd never do a cul-de-sac because there's only 6 people that live on it, let's say. You'd all do the most popular roads or the cut-through roads. So, they have a program that helps them weigh all these factors statistically. And it doesn't give you the answer, but it gives them guidance into how you can most cost-effectively spend money. Once a road, I live on County Road, that was judged to be one of the worst roads in town. It's been torn up now for a month. Hopefully they'll repave it. Not quite a month. How much worse is it going to get if you never get to it? Not a whole lot. But for the neighbors, and it's a big cut-through road, it's not a question of how much worse it is, it's already worse. So for a road like that, the model is going to tell you it's not as cost-effective as some other roads, but you have to do it. So it's definitely a complicated thing. They just kind of, almost like an artist, they just kind of go, okay, here's what we're going to do. And they try to do neighborhoods together. So, when 1 or 2 streets is done in an area, if the others need some work, they try to do that just to get it all done. And it's generally cost-effective as if a vendor's doing it, which is typically true. It's much more cost-effective to put them in one location and say, this is what you do. So hopefully that works. When Peter was town manager, he once asked for, I want to say, a $5 million debt exclusion to do either sidewalks or roads, figuring that would take a bite out of things, and town meeting just said, no, are you kidding? But everyone wanted their road done. So roads is kind of a funny thing. Reading, again, does a much better job funding it, but we have a need for it. And then, if you count all the road work that's been done in town and paid for the state, we've put an enormous amount of money into roads. And they have something called the Pavement Management Index, which, if you're 80, it's good. If you're 90, you're spending too much money. If it's 70, you need some help. And if it's 60, it's a disaster. And every road is ranked. I haven't seen the data for us, but we went from the low 70s to the middle to high 70s over the last several years. And so 80 is kind of a sort of a cost-effective place to be, I guess I would say. You feel a little better if you're 80 or above. So there is definitely math behind this, but at the end of the day, this is kind of some art.
Yeah, good, okay. And that's good. Like, so it's not, it's just like subjective. It's definitely a lot behind. So
Yeah.
That's good.
Are we ready for a vote? All right, so all those in favor of Article 3? All those opposed? There's no one. So it's 6-0, it passes.
Move to approve Article 4 as written.
A second?
Second.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Any question, comment on Article 4?
And so we're okay with, sorry.
Oh, sorry, just a clarification. It looks like the only ongoing operating expense we're looking at is the $3,000 for the public safety wages, right?
And the next line,
The health inspectors,
So
okay.
13,000.
So it's mostly kind of one-time capital
Yep.
projects. Okay, that's,
And then we're okay to vote on this using free cash, even though free cash hasn't been certified, because we'll know by the time.
Yeah.
We'll know by the time it is time.
Okay. All right.
I am. It's a reasonable question. I am.
Okay.
And if for some odd reason it wasn't ready, you might want to tinker with the numbers a little, but again, there's enough in health insurance to use if that was the choice.
We had to do something.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments on Article 4? All right, let's go to a vote. All those in favor of approving Article 4? 6-0, it passes.
Move to approve Article 5 as written. Oh, this is the $50 bill one.
$52.19.
Let's have a long discussion. Let's delve in.
Anyone,
Maybe
do we
they
have
want
a
to pay that.
se- do we have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Jackie. No comment, correct? I'm gonna lead us to that, yeah, there isn't any comment? No comment, all right, so let's go to the vote. All those in favor? 6-0. I shouldn't say it passes, it's 6-0 that we would recommend to
Yes.
the article to the town meeting.
True. Are we on 7?
We are on 7.
Move to approve Article 7. I don't have an Article 7 in my.
It was on.
packet.
Thank you. I was about to say as written, and I don't
Actually,
have.
the article should be in the handout. Whoops, is this my handout? Never mind, sorry. That's good.
Yeah, that's your hand up.
I still haven't written a background because I didn't know if they were going to supply it, but based on what I heard tonight and what I've said to them, I can put that together. Second. The most important thing
Thanks,
you heard
Eric.
is $250,000 a year for 30 years, starting in a few years.
With the flexibility for town to work if there is a better and more
If
fun.
there's a way.
Okay.
Yeah, I would really like to see that brought in, 30 years.
Yeah, I mean,
Seems
if
like
you
a long
do the math,
time.
I know it is.
roughly, that's $7 million, roughly over 30 years.
But
For
it changes
getting the
every
time
year.
value of money. If you could pay $4 million today instead of $7 million over 30 years,
Yeah.
and you had the ability to pay $4 million or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know, what I propose to their financial advisor is, I know it's a variable cost because it depends on enrollment, but couldn't we just pick some number and pay that up front, maybe half, and then just take on less? And he's like, no, nobody thought about that, you're a pain. And, you know, I just mean to be thoughtful, not any other thing, because honestly, many of these cities and towns, I know what he said, but they're not in the financial shape Reading is. If more state aid came, I would be happy to give it to the cities and not need it for Reading, because they are not in as good a financial shape. So we're in a position, I don't mean to take advantage of that, it just seems like we need to know what our options are.
Well, yeah.
Wasn't it because the enrollment changes from year to year, so they
Yes.
could owe us money, you know?
Potentially,
Oh,
and
yeah,
that's why
yeah.
you kind of, it's like snow and ice, you never want to budget, well, you don't really want to budget too much,
Yeah.
because then you can't ever budget
They don't want to
less.
settle with us and then have us have more kids out there than we should
We
have.
have to
Yeah, so
go
but if the
find-
average is 33, you say, you set it out 20, I was gonna say, you set it at 20,
Yeah.
and then it's, you set it, maybe even set it at your floor, for that 7-year span or whatever, you set it at the floor.
Yeah.
And then now you're looking at, you're taking advantage of your position, and you can be prudent about, the time value of money. Again,
I'm surprised nobody else was asking about that kind of an
Well, it
option.
hasn't come close enough
Oh.
to costing money yet.
I do, I appreciate the exploration of, having other options, instead of just, not asking the question.
And what Charlie said is exactly right. I wasn't happy that we're getting 140 million and we're paying 180 million. It's like, wait a minute. We're getting a 78% reimbursement because that's, I think Chelsea's the highest number, we all get it. But so many of their costs are not eligible for a variety of reasons. But one of them being, their assumed costs per square foot are just so low versus the market. So their allowance is this, they give you 78% of their allowance, not of your cost. And then their site's really challenging because of ledge, so they have a slug of money needed for that. And they don't really have a lot of options for locations to keep running a school and building a new one. So I'm hopeful that the state money will come in for some of those reasons, not just because we'd like to have money, but there's specific reasons. You have COVID money. Not to get into the water tank discussion, but we had an escalation because of COVID.
Yep.
The school has the same escalation in construction costs because of COVID. The money's for COVID, let's go.
Yeah.
So,
Would be nice, yeah.
I'm optimistic they'll get money. Some of my peers are not as optimistic. So we'll see. Every little bit helps.
definitely.
Yeah, my take on this article is those are our students and that's our school. We're one of 12 communities, but that's our school. And it really as much as any of our schools in town that we think of. So, I thought their presentation was fair. And schools are really expensive to build, never mind a vocational school, which has all sorts of costs that are additional. So,
Yeah, and the students have been keeping the current school patched together for many years.
I've actually
Trust me.
been through that school a few times,
Okay,
and it's
you know.
well past, this comes down to if we don't approve it,
Reading would have
what's the
never-
plan? It needs to be renovated or
Reading would have
replaced.
never
It's a mess.
gone that far.
Exactly. Yep,
Killen
that's
is in pristine shape compared to their school.
absolutely.
Yep.
It's sad to agree.
Any other discussion on Article 7? All right, let's move to a vote. All those in favor? 6-0.
Is that it?
That is it on the articles.
Warrant.
We're far from done for the evening, Gene.
Yeah, it was your agenda item,
Just
wasn't it?
gonna
Discussion
celebrate-
on ARPA things? That's-
I'm gonna celebrate small victories.
Yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, so I think and that was our outside of the minutes, that's our next agenda item was to talk ARPA, correct?
Yep.
I wanted to share something regarding
Please, Sharon, yeah, definitely.
So last week I was at the MMAAA conference, and Powers and Sullivan, which is a CPA firm that audits municipalities like us, one of the partners had done a presentation about ARPA, and saying that it's very important that the projects that, you can describe in a way that they're going to see the point of how that relates to a COVID impact. And I'd asked a question about what we were planning on doing, because he had presented on one of his slides that debt service was not allowed. And I'm like, that's not what I read in the 134 pages that they sent. And it was just a misunderstanding. Our town council says you absolutely can, but we only have a certain time frame. December 31st, 2026 is the last time you can spend money, but you have to have it encumbered by the
I think it's June of '24.
yeah, or December
Maybe it's
31st of 2024. So that would give us a very short window for debt service for the water tank. But when I mentioned the water tank, he's like, why in the world would you borrow for that? They've given you the money, why are you? And I'm like, because we haven't had any community conversations about what our priorities are. He's like, but that project is a gimme. It's a project that's listed in their literature. They're not going to push back. You want to pick projects that are clearly outlined as something they were thinking of when they put it together, and the water tank is something, water projects, water infrastructure are clearly outlined as something that they're looking for communities to do. So he said, because I would encourage and just make sure they're aware that you really do want to try and pick projects that are really in the white and not gray, because gray could get pushed back to you later. So if you're really too creative and you don't sell it to them the way, you can describe it however you want, but if the feds don't agree with us, we could end up not getting the funding and then needing another funding source for something. So he said, be very careful about that. Try and make sure that you pre-check with your auditors who are going to audit the program. Maybe even reach out to the feds and make sure that they agree with your thought process before you proceed with projects, just to protect yourself. Because he's like, but that project that you're describing, I would do that for sure with some ARPA money. I don't know how much, but he's like, that when you have something existing that's going to be an easy pass through for the federal government to approve, he's like, I would advise you to do more than what you're doing. So I figured I would mention that to you because I advised you on the debt, but then knowing now that you have to have encumbered it by December 31st, 2024, that's only a couple of years that you'll be able to pay debt service. That's not going to be a lot of money, and it is a project that is going to sail through because it is outlined in their literature very clearly. So that was just something I wanted to share with FinCom, because we had thought we could use it through 2026, because that's what literature says, but it has to be kind of encumbered by December 31st. The debt service probably will qualify after that, December 31st, 2024. So, and I know it's in the book.
2026.
2026, it has to be paid for
Yeah.
spend, but it has to be kind of encumbered by December 31st, 2024. So debt service happening after that, I don't know that they'll take that. So that's a little bit scary. And so I'm just thinking that even though it's in the book, it might be something that we might want to consider on town meeting throwing out the option of the ARPA funding. But the select board is the spending authority. I did check with the town council to make sure that I knew who decides, who gets the end say, and it is the select board.
For all,
For the whole ARPA funding.
for all
yeah.
ARPA.
But we haven't had any conversation, so it is an odd spot that we find ourselves in. Something is moving through that could really be an easy pass-through for ARPA, and we haven't had any community conversations. So it just want people to be aware that that's a big piece, a big chunk we could use of that ARPA funding that would not be questioned and should be probably considered. So.
I have a question on the authority. So that the select board makes the final determination on how all ARPA's funds are spent. Is there any, I mean, does that end up in the operating budget that goes before town meeting, or truly, like, town meeting never even sees it?
They never really see it.
Okay.
But a town meeting floor, you could, well, they could have, if you put it as the funding source, I suppose it would be, you know, to
Yeah, I
approve
was
the
gonna say,
additional project.
it's complicated. Why don't you talk a little about how the recent past grants have worked for the pandemic?
The past grant, we just kind of based it on need of what we needed. The CARES grant was really for PPE and all of the sanitation that we needed to do, and so we started doing that stuff right away. And we didn't really get all of those expenditures approved through the select board. It wasn't clear to me that I needed to, but now.
You didn't need to for those.
Yeah, and so for a federal grant, I didn't know, but this, I was very concerned because so many people, so many boards are interested in this funding. And then I needed to know who is the spending authority, because there wasn't a separate ARPA grant for school department where CARES did have separate ones for it. So there was multiple boards that have thoughts on what we should be using it for. Who in the end gets to decide? I do think a community conversation is very, very valuable. In the end, the conversation is going to end with the select board and how they decide. But we can all have that conversation, but because we haven't, this ARPA funding could kind of go by the wayside for the water tank if we don't think about that at town meeting.
A question I had, and I don't know where I heard this from, but and I don't think it was necessarily, Reading based, but like, as it related to other, and I don't know if it's CARES or not, but like I think I've read in a few places where that certain, like funding where you thought you had the grant as it related to this, and then you kind of, you went a little bit farther along, and then, you didn't have it, or there was some competing interests. Is that is that part of
It's even a
the?
concern right now with the CARES grant and the FEMA regarding our expenses.
Maybe
at the beginning
I think
of the
that's what it
pandemic.
was. That was
I
what it
feel
was.
like there's been a lot of pushback on both grants, and it's rather confusing because I'm moving things all around. And to me, it seems these things were pretty much outlined as allowable expenses, and we were given the impression that FEMA would cover it 75%, and then they didn't. They pushed back, and then they told us to put on the CARES, and now you're hearing back from FEMA. Okay, now we'll go back to the beginning of the pandemic and pay those things. And I've got a month left to close out the CARES grant. This going back and forth is very confusing. And so what we were advised by Brendan Sweeney over at the state related to the CARES grant is if you've already received a rejection from FEMA, put it on CARES. But I've also seen some things come back from CARES that I was like, why is this coming back to me? And it could very well be that my description hasn't pointed or drove home why this is related, and that's possible. But I just got a good pushback from CARES just last week. So I'm trying to close that grant up, but nothing's guaranteed. It's all about how you describe what the intent was and how it relates to COVID.
Yep.
If you don't describe it well, they don't see it, and they can say no, and that's always going to be true. But when it comes to big projects like infrastructure, where you could be talking millions of dollars, I don't want to go back to town meeting and say I was wrong. I let them use ARPA funds and they don't agree. Or I just don't want to do that. I prefer to make sure that we're very clear before we start that we're on the right path.
So, sorry, I'm cutting anybody else off, but it's like, so did you kind of get the sense from, and maybe I'm reading a little bit between the lines, in that meeting that you had, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, but that there is some concern that cities and towns aren't going to be able to use that, like if they're not kind of crystal clear and they don't have it all, that that's gonna they're not gonna be able to use it in time, or they're not gonna be able to get that full allotment. Is that what kind of came across?
It seemed that way.
Yep.
If the CARES grant is wrapping up soon, and the opera grant, a lot of communities got a lot of money, so it's gonna be difficult to find projects and be able to directly relate them to how they're impacted by how the pandemic caused the impact. And so there is that thought process. With the CARES grant, it's supposed to go through December 31st. The state is so concerned that money's gonna be left on the table that they have cut our timeline off to October 29th, so they have 2 months to spend whatever communities fail to spend. So
Wow.
that's how, because it's a difficult thing. None of us knew how much this pandemic was gonna cost. And so, we started with the things that were obvious, PPE, sanitation, the vaccination clinics, the mask giveaways and all of that. But there were things that we could have been doing earlier, but we didn't know if we'd have enough money. So there will be a lot of communities that will be sitting on a little bit of that money, but the state's going to try and redistribute that before all is said and done and has to go back to the federal government. So, and that's how concerned they are. They're taking it back 2 months earlier so that they can spend it. They don't want to send it back to the federal government. They want to spend it. So what they turn back could potentially be used, for the vocational school, right? Could that be an option? So, but a lot of people I spoke to said, we're not going to be able to spend it all. Some of it's going to get turned back.
And I will say that from a FinCom perspective, I think that's got to be our highest priority is maximizing the use of those,
Yeah.
right? Like that
Exactly.
is,
Yeah.
like whatever we do, let's use the money they gave us.
Yeah, and we definitely need to have conversations sooner rather than later,
Mm-hmm.
And the CPA who gave the presentation was to spend it quickly, the best you can, because it's many years you're reporting on it, and you want to be able to, if you spend it quickly or you start to spend it quickly and they push back on you, you're going to know sooner rather than later. You're not going to lose that money. So those were good points that he made, and he's like, I think you should advise them that maybe borrowing for all of that water tank might not be the best route, especially where it is an allowable project and it is not going to get pushed back. So I didn't want to leave you guys without that information.
Yep.
Yeah, this is, a lot of things have been new in the last year or two. The finance things are generally invisible to most people. I don't know how this is going to work technically in terms of you having a recommendation, town meeting taking a vote, and the select board having the final say. And I also don't know how Sharon is going to account for it. I don't know if you do. If, ARPA was going to pay a fraction of anything, would it flow through the budget process and should be shown as a source, or would it just not be there at all? I don't know.
It would flow through the grant, so I could transfer money out of the grant for a project into a project. So if you were doing the water tank, I could transfer
So
it.
you would see it, but FinCom and town meeting would not. It's not in the budget that they see. That's what I'm asking.
Well, if it was something coming into, if it was coming into the main support, so if it was coming into water, sewer, stormwater,
Yeah.
but where the water project has got its own capital project, they wouldn't necessarily see that.
Yeah, not to get too much in the weeds, but there's two kinds of grants from my perspective. There's grants that you see in the budget process as an offset, and some of the school grants are like that.
Yeah.
There's plenty of school grants you never see. The school committee knows about them and sees them. And it's like, this cost belongs over there, not in the Reading budget. So I don't really know which kind of money this is.
We can certainly do it either way. If
Okay.
it's allowable either way, if you wanted to see it coming in.
I think it would be
we
good to see, so
absolutely
everyone
would have
can
it come see it
keep
as
track.
a support.
Okay. And then especially, where you potentially have general fund versus enterprise fund sources of funds. You want to be thoughtful.
I have to have them set up in an organized way within the grant so that they're all by projects, so that they know, okay, what category does this fall under and what's the name of the project. So they want them all kind of project driven and a lot of explanation, up to 250 words of description for each, to explain how the project relates to the pandemic.
So that would suggest, just thinking out loud, this is the sausage being made, that, a project goes to town meeting, there's a motion, there's a source of funds listed, town meeting votes. If ARPA is a source of funds, and the select board didn't agree in advance, and don't agree later, then that vote has to change. The town meeting has to pick it up again. So I'd almost encourage, again, without being bond counsel, he did send me some advice in having a motion that's flexible. If the select board hasn't decided yet in advance on anything, then have a motion that can do this or that depending on the vote of the select board, for instance. I don't know how else you do it.
Yeah, because they would have had to agree prior to town meeting, but that's a source
And I
that they're
don't know
willing to use.
how they agree and how binding their vote is. This is all new, so we
Yeah.
just don't know.
Because-
The board has never had this responsibility ever in the past, ever.
Oh. Not that I was ever aware of, no.
Whereas the school committee does
Yep.
on a much more regular basis with their grants.
Yes, so that's an interesting point, because if this hasn't been discussed or approved by the select board, does the town meeting even have the right to use it as a funding source? That's a good point.
Yeah, bond council sent me some draft motions just to comment a lot from that discussion, I guess.
So then, from a procedural perspective, then, are you suggesting that the article with respect to the water tank should include that specific designation of ARPA funding? If-
I'll answer that before Sharon gives you the real answer. I think it would be rude to sort of preempt the select board who hasn't had this discussion.
Yeah, sure.
So the way I would approach it, and Karen's here listening, she may just differ. If town meeting is going to approve the water tank, my best path forward is for them to approve $2.5 million of debt, like you've all discussed, for us to do some sort of short-term temporary borrowing, maybe for a year, and then let the more full discussion happen. And then, let's say we borrow for a year. If town meeting approves $2.5 million, we borrow $2.5 million for a year. And we, well, when I say a year, I think it has to be next June. We can't go past the fiscal year. So if there's a fuller discussion between now and next June, then you know what? We want to do this instead of all debt. When we have to then term out and fully issue a longer term debt, then we could issue less if there's another source. So much like that vote school discussion, we're going to do short-term borrowing until we really get to the big one. Reading used to do that before I got here, and there were reasons it didn't work, but in this case, it's a good tool. So if you don't know what your final decision is yet, but you want to get started, then we can do that.
And does that time frame that you just described keep us okay, keep us on board with respect to what Sharon mentioned earlier of needing debt encumbrance by,
Yeah,
was
it
it
would, by
December 31st,
2024, so we've got some
Yeah,
time.
oh yeah, for that it would.
Time for that,
But
yeah.
that would, if you will, if we're specifically talking about the water tank, that would require the select board to make that decision in advance of next year, which is certainly easier than the next 2 weeks.
right,
So
before
we
that
could leave-
short-term debt expired.
Right.
We
Yeah,
can leave it as it is,
We
yeah.
can't, I'm not aware that we can carry short-term debt beyond the year and then change the amount.
Yeah, I don't know
I don't
about
think
that.
we can.
But we'd have to have it paid off by June 30th.
Yeah, you can't have that debt open on the books. It needs a permanent debt on the books. But I'll ask, maybe there's a way to extend it past June. Because, there's a fine line between doing it in time, as you suggest, to spend the money, and doing it too fast where you don't feel like you had a good conversation with the community.
The one thing I will say though, it's, and maybe this is to your point, Sharon, too. And I preface this by saying, by no means do I want to circumvent, kind of community discussion, because I think it's very important, it's vital. But we are talking about water that everyone uses. That would be this isn't, something where it's, I think it's pretty universal from a community perspective. And so, and again, not to, to kind of usurp a community discussion, but there are only probably less than a handful of things that would kind of fall into that.
Yeah, I mean, it impacts everyone, yeah. Using it for that because your water rates won't go up.
There are sort of two things that are shifting for me in this conversation versus the last time you presented on ARPA. One was last time my perception was, we have plenty of time. Like, take a breath. We have plenty of time to prioritize projects and really look at the big picture. What I'm hearing now is a little bit more urgency because of those deadlines. Yeah. That, and of course, the other big thing is the clarity on who the authorizing body is. That's something we didn't know.
You didn't know going in.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, that changes things for sure.
I'm trying to think, I mean, the SARP is supposed to be things that are because of COVID. And I look at some of the material here for the water tower about how it's in such bad shape that we should have done it already. So how do we sell that to the feds to say, hey, we want to spend this money on something we should have done 2 years ago that had nothing to do with
So they
COVID?
essentially say in their literature that any project that would fall under the Clean Water Revolving Fund or Clean Drinking Water Revolving, those two, if you look them up, they give you
Yeah.
projects that are approved under those revolving funds, would be an improved project for ARPA. So all you have to do is prove that it's on that list. The
Okay.
water tank replacement is on that list, so yeah.
And if you wanted to take the other step, some portion of the costs are clearly pandemic driven, supply chain
Okay,
driven,
yeah.
price of steel
The
driven.
fact
And
that
it's
it's
not the whole
4.5
amount
to
either.
2.7.
Not the whole amount by any
Yeah,
means, but
okay,
some
all right.
amount of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm a little bit more worried is I think there's a sort of truthful connecting it to ARPA, being honest and transparent about how we use the grant kind of morally or ethically or appropriately in the spirit in which the grant was given. But I'm also hearing from you, there's just a lot of technicalities about it sounds
Well,
like,
this seems like a sure thing, and they may not agree with you.
Exactly.
And so when you look at their literature and they're pointing to something like infrastructure for water, which they're gonna not question because they really wanna see that done for clean water,
Yeah.
that's an easy one to get through. They can't say no to you when it's in their literature, and you're like, but right here.
Yeah.
it says.
Free cash is money you can decide as a community what to do with. This is not the same. It's someone else's money
Yeah.
that they need to approve how you're using it. So
Sure.
I don't think that everyone fully has grasped that from the discussions I've heard. And I understand why, it's all new, but it's an important difference.
yeah, that was more my perception the last time we had this conversation, was kind of, oh, you've got this excess free cash and the $7.5 million. It's a lot of money that we should be looking at holistically. And my thinking is shifting based on this. Like, this is very specific money with very specific uses and some timeframe
It
crunches.
kind of made me panic the way he described it.
Yeah.
He's like, you gotta make sure that you sell this to the feds. They could push back on you.
Right.
And, you want to pick projects that they're not going to do that. So, and this is one project that's definitely in their literature. So it's like, and the costs have gone up dramatically, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Something needs to happen. So it's definitely a use that we can allow. And so it definitely is something to be considered. It doesn't have to change by October. We have it in as debt. Like Bob said, we could even do a short-term borrowing and decide, after. But I wanted to make sure that I reiterated that change needed to be acknowledged because I did not realize that.
Well, and I also, again, there's certain parts of that you latch onto, the possibility that you could be turning back money
Oh.
is like, gives me the shivers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the other side of it that, again, I'm all for, kind of taking a methodical approach, but if it's letting pitches, pass by you during that, that's that would be unforgivable, from that perspective. If you don't have the project, that's another thing, that's,
Sure.
that's in and of itself, but if you do, and again, this gets back to, I think, one of the other conversations, and I think the example you just mentioned, we had, there's sources, you have the free cash out of ARPA, but then, if this one has more stipulations around it, well, then that allows you to be able to use that and then, save free cash or save your borrowing to do something else too.
That's sort of the silver lining I'm seeing. I was sitting here feeling a little stressed about ARPA now. But I'm like, well, the silver lining is the free cash position, which should be clarified in the next few weeks. But I think it has, for the past decade, been stronger and stronger and stronger. What I'm getting is that we're looking at a very, very strong free cash position. So the nice thing is, I don't feel like with the ARPA funds, it's like, this is our chance to do these projects. Because it could be like, well, these projects are covered over here, but we have the ability to borrow. We certainly have a healthy free cash. So for things that aren't ARPA covered, we're in a very nice position to maybe fund some things.
Yeah, but when I say December 31st, 2026, you can spend it on debt service, and I realize, back 2 years, you're not able to do the same amount that you would have thought if you were paying debt service. So that's a very big change in information.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, just another question, looking back at the financial forum, presentation on the uses. It sounds like then we don't expect there to be any questions from the feds on how the tank project connects to clean drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. And I guess part of that question may implicate how the tank relates to the MWRA's physical plan overall.
You know, the storage tank we have doesn't really relate to the MWRA at all, I guess I'll say.
Okay.
We have two, so one could be considered extra and could be thought that way. Maybe the MWRA could use it, for instance.
I see, but this one, because it's
This is
for
ours.
town public
Yeah.
safety, okay.
It's not just for in case there's a fire or in case there's some problem with water delivery. It's also the balancing mechanism of the water distribution system in the town.
Yeah.
So when they have to empty it or take it offline, they have to do a lot of work.
It has
so
that
there's
downstream.
balanced water everywhere.
Unintended effects,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
And the use during the pandemic was massively different.
Right.
And they had to be out there, tinkering kind of all the time.
So out of this, what, 7.5 million for ARPA, we think the water tower could take 2.5?
That's probably a political discussion.
And it's really up to the
But,
select board.
We've already
it can't-
we've
it
already
can't
borrowed
take the-
4.5, so we don't need more than
Right.
2.5. So,
You could feasibly take the 2.5 completely from ARPA if the select board agreed. It's about
But you wouldn't,
determining.
but you couldn't take any more than 2.5?
right.
Okay.
Leaves
So
us
we've-
with
we've
5.
still got at least 5.
They could do that, they could say, just take $1 million, they could, they can
Yeah,
pick the
okay.
number, honestly, it's really about comfort. There's
Oh,
there's
at least-
other priorities to consider within the community.
But there's at least 5 million that we
Yeah.
need to discuss here as to where do we think we're gonna go?
Yeah.
And maybe we discuss that and say, hey, we have 6 million, so we don't wanna take all of that out.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And also, just bring up, because I don't know if any of you asked, but one of the select board members asked. We've already issued $4.5 million 20-year debt for the project. We can't use that money for many things, but it doesn't have to be the water tank. To me, it should be a water-related cost since the ratepayers pay it, but legally, that's not necessary, which is just bizarre.
Yeah.
But for instance, if the community wants us to instead go back to the old way and paint the tank and do maintenance on the tank, and there's break-evens for that, it's in the updated warrant that I sent you, that's not eligible. 20-year debt cannot be used for that purpose. So you'd have to find a different source of.
Even though that's water.
Right, because maintenance of a tank is not the same as replacing a tank.
Okay.
Debt authorizations under Mass General Law have to do with the useful life of the asset. So you borrow for 20 years because the tank is going to last for longer than that. If you're going to do a painting job that takes every 10 or 15 years, you can't borrow for 20
For
years
20
because you're
years,
going to be
okay.
really wrecking the ratepayers down the road by doubling the costs. So that's kind of the theory.
All right.
So, there's a much more limited amount. I mean, had I ever known, we'd never be in this place, but there's a much more limited amount of things that you could borrow for 20 years that you could move that prior borrowing to.
Okay.
The building, absolutely.
So you could build it, you could redo Killam with that money.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
So it's
not water,
long-term,
but it's long-term.
specifically
Yep.
long-term.
Yep. Long, useful life of whatever the asset
Yeah,
is.
building or something like that, 20 years.
So I have two reactions to that. One, I'm shocked, and I shared that with you earlier today. Like, I can't believe that's allowed, that you can borrow money for a purpose, and then
Oh,
2
yeah,
years later
yeah.
be like, we're gonna
No,
put a
that's
roof on
not-
Killam. Like, I
And just to
literally
be clear,
can't
Town
believe.
meeting has to approve it, it's not like.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can't.
Right, you
Yeah.
can't just switch it, but timing, I'm actually really, really surprised by that. And the second thing is just that sort of following that through to its next logical conclusion, I would really exercise caution in even considering that. I just think it's a dangerous precedent. And I worry, while it may be legal, I immediately think of bond rating agencies. How do they look on that? Well, the town said they were gonna do X, and 2 years later they did Y. I don't know the answer to that, but there's a lot of stuff about it that makes me
Doesn't pass the
very
sniff test.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, it does, it really doesn't, I mean, at least, and again, not to say that you wouldn't have a good case, to present against it.
Oh, no, it might be the most logical thing in the world, sure.
But that's not always how you're rated. That might not, you might not always get that opportunity to be able to, sometimes it is just, what you see on the page, no nuance.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, and your point on precedent, I hadn't thought of that. You just don't, inadvertently want to set something up that, is a slippery slope.
And the other factor that's clearly less important, but it's there, is we borrowed at 1.25% for 20 years.
Yeah.
We couldn't do that today, we won't be able to do that in a year.
Yeah.
So there is opportunity cost of not doing things right away.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that on this article, if we can frame it in a very broad way, so town meeting basically says yes or no to the $2.5 million overage, right? They say yes, go ahead, finish the project, or no, and then kind of figure out what that looks like. But it sounds like the ARPA question really is for the select board at a later date.
Yeah.
So if it can be worded in a way that the appropriate people make that decision, that seems like the right thing to me.
I agree.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's unfair to ask the board at their next meeting to decide.
Absolutely,
I think
yeah.
that's grossly unfair.
I agree.
And then make sure that we act so that we can present as much flexibility for as long as we can for this process. But this is going to cause town meeting a little bit of agita, because normally it's a black and white thing.
Yep.
You're asking us for this or that, and this is like, well, it's this or that, and it's maybe.
Yeah.
But it is what
Times
it
we
is.
live in.
This is not a town meeting decision, which is very unusual.
I want to say unprecedented in my
That's the
time.
first time I can remember.
Yeah, I've never seen anything quite like this.
Yep. Did you want to discuss an ARPA process at all?
It's a question for the chair.
Yeah, no, let's, kind of, so on the ARPA, kind of process, again, after the forum, Gene and I had kind of got together a little bit and kind of talked about it to some degree and I think we mentioned it either at the forum or in our last meeting. What we wanted to be able to do is kind of kick off that thoughtful process, in the community, kind of involvement. And so, because one of the, again, one of the tenets that I kind of harp on is that, we've had this, really miraculous harmony between the town and the schools as far as, how, from an operating budget perspective and didn't want this to introduce, strife, from that perspective. So, and again, this was also under the impression that we had a lot of time, to be able to do this, so we can, let's take this nice stroll down and, to be able to do that. So, so really what we were, kind of thinking is trying to create, some type of a working group, to be able to, really kind of get that community involvement, the prioritization, I think that we've talked about. So, out of the two of us, I think you both realized the person that would be more organized than the other. So Gene drafted something.
More time on my hands.
So Gene had a really good kind of timeline and thought process and questions to ask and composition of of folks to kind of participate. And so since that time I've had a conversation with Karen. I've had a conversation with the chair of the school committee, because in order to start to kind of create that process. So really kind of, and hopefully we'll get to a point, where we'll have something a little bit more definitive to be able to share at the financial forum. But again, it is really, and this is just more of, the ability to start to, with Bob and Sharon's help and with, the superintendent and the director of finance, having all of those, kind of folks at the table, kind of looking at that piece of it, and, kind of giving us some, kind of more thought as it relates to that. I'm sure I've missed a few high-level points, but some of the details there too. That's at least kind of like what we were starting to kind of kick around and wanted to make sure that, everyone, kind of from the finance committee knew about it, and obviously folks that, if they're still sticking around after 2.5 hours of watching this, that they knew about it now as well. But it's, definitely just something that we want to be able to, again, still kind of honor that, kind of thoughtful approach. But again, also now realizing, where the final authority sits as well, that's,
Yeah.
It's still, I think it's still, kind of advocating the right process, but then it leads kind of to a different place, as far as from a decision, making process, but still.
I think, I think that the people we were thinking who need to be at the table, namely representatives from the schools, representatives elected from the town, people from FinCom, as well as staff from both groups, feels like the right group regardless. But I think you're right. I think there's some interesting conversation around, are we looking at all capital and debt? Are we looking at everything for the next 10 or 15 years? And then looking at free cash, and then looking at debt, and then looking at ARPA and figuring out how we fund it? Or are we limiting this to just the ARPA fund? $7.5 million is and that's an open question. And it's an interesting question, because I can see an argument both ways. But now that there is now that there's a real lack of clarity on, a real clarity on, well, ARPA funds are authorized by this group, and all the rest of capital and debt is town meeting, that it's an interesting challenge. So I think one of the first questions is the scope of this group. What are we here to do? But I do think the people we've identified are the right people, regardless of the scope.
Yeah, and then, it allows it to be a little, it's, a few representatives for each doesn't really end up makes it a little bit easier to be able to schedule and.
Yeah, like 7 or 8 people.
Yeah, and it doesn't get too unwieldy and things of that nature too, so it's, so again, love to, kind of, and if anyone now or, as you start to think about it, have any kind of questions or comments or suggestions, believe me, love to hear it, and I've already gotten, kind of great feedback from both from Karen and Tom as well, and just kind of sharing that with them. So, again, obviously more to come as we get to the fore. I think that's really the kind of the goal there too. Yep.
And I, you discussed this, I think it was the last meeting, so I asked town council a couple of questions, because I'm not sure what your intentions would be. If somebody creates a committee, whether it's the select board creating it or you creating it, and discussing it in a meeting like this formally, it has to follow open meeting law, there has to be minutes, it has to be in a public location, and so on and so forth. If it's less formal, and again, I don't know the appetite, then it may not have to. And if it's less formal, that doesn't mean it's not transparent, because you're going to want, the main point is you're going to want community input and transparency.
Yeah.
So it's somewhat of a technicality, but it's important to understand whether you need to keep minutes, post meetings, and such.
Right.
And even if we were to move forward with an open meeting format, I think it's really important to build, and we chatted about this, it's really important to build in regular updates to town meeting, regular updates to the different boards, so that there's this kind of, what I would envision and hope is sort of this ongoing conversation. This group is still meeting, here's what we're thinking, here's when the next meeting is, here's how we're getting public input, so that hopefully by the time we get to the actual recommendation phase, every one of the stakeholders is like, yeah, we're sick of hearing about it. You've held our hands through the entire thing. We know exactly.
You're not there yet?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Over communicate, I guess
Exactly.
is what
Well, I think
I'm
that's
saying.
I think that's the big point too. We want to, we do want it to, to lead to decisions, and action, I think at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And at least to be able to facilitate that by not leaving anything else unexplored.
And I think one of the sort of my thoughts about it is, there's never going to be enough money to fund everything we want. So there's no outcome here where you can say everyone's going to be happy. That isn't going to happen. But if we can articulate a process and get everyone to buy into that process and then go slowly and thoughtfully through it, at the end, whatever feelings anyone has, I understood that process. I get why they did what they did. I get why you got those outcomes. So that's sort of that.
And thinking back to the library and how that worked and some of the disharmony, to the extent it's interesting to or under the jurisdiction of the permanent building committee, you don't want to forget them.
Yeah.
John Dory and I asked them a couple times about things like building security or turf 1 and turf 2, and they clearly have some expertise, but they did not at that time want to take it up formally as a committee. They said it's not a building. we only want to do, you know, X, Y, Z. But then some of the members informally met with John and I a couple times, and, you know, as trades experts, they were very helpful. So don't forget them as a resource, and then also as an obligation, for instance, for Killen, clearly.
Yeah.
Right, sure.
And then there's gonna be gray areas, does this belong to you or not, and it's ultimately their call, as far as I can understand.
Any, you know, kind of questions? Hey, go ahead, Karen, sure.
No, thanks, this has been very helpful. I like being able, I like not running the meeting and being able to think about things. And, very helpful, love FinCom. So one of the things that, so in addition to Arbor, so when I've been speaking with Senator Lewis's office, you know, and they're saying, the ARPA's money is wonderful, giving me some feedback. Initially, it sounded like they might be issuing additional chunks of funding to communities. But speaking with Senator Lewis at the forest celebration, he didn't think that was the way it was gonna go. He personally said he thought grant programs, matching grant programs would be the way to go. But they are discussing it, but they didn't think it was unlikely they would get another, you know, bucket of money. And on that same line, they were quick, he and his staff were quick to remind me that, well, you know, the schools are also getting ARPA funds, they just have a different name. They're called the ESSER funds. So I was able to get some numbers and share those with Ed this week. So the ARPA bucket is a little bit bigger. So, you know, that's really good news. But it's interesting with Sharon's finding out who the spending authority is, because per Bob's comment, I'm assuming the schools spend the ESSER funding, and that's why then they would pick another funding authority. I don't know, but anyways, this has been a very informative meeting.
Thanks, Karen. Cool, all right, if there's nothing else, we can move to approval of the minutes.
If I could say one more thing.
Of course.
It's being very humble. He's spent an enormous amount of time outside of this committee room working on this. He's mentioned he talked to Karen, he talked to Tom. I know he's met with Bob. He's had some long conversations with me. I just wanted to acknowledge, typically the chair of the FinCom doesn't have to put in that many hours. So just wanted to thank you for the work you've done.
Yeah, Eric never told me. He never mentioned it at all.
Eric never did anything like this.
That's right,
Did you
exactly.
guys just vote him a raise?
Yes.
I
heard
moved
there's
to
money.
double his salary.
Yeah, exactly. I heard there's a lot of money going around. I'm waiting to see it. No, that sounds good. Cool. All right, well, now let's please now move to the approval of the minutes.
Oh, I closed my computer. What's the date on them?
The 13th of September.
Move to approve the minutes dated September 13th, 2021.
Second?
Thanks, Jeffrey. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? 6-0, Jackie.
The hand raising is nice.
Oh, believe me, you have no idea how much I love that. All right, I don't think that we have any other business, and it's definitely past 9:30. I don't have the same select board hours. You guys can go to 10:30. I'm cutting those off at 9:30.
So do you think you're gonna want to try to meet between the 12th and the 18th?
So the 12th and
The board's gonna make some decision, I think, on the 12th. And then town meeting's the 18th, and town meeting you don't know what the decision is, town meeting won't know. So you can meet, you don't have to meet at all, you don't have to make a recommendation. Bill Brown will complain, but you don't have to. But if you want to, then you have a limited window to do this.
When's the financial forum?
Final
Then
forms
that's
would be
the
after.
20th.
Yeah,
That's
forms-
after town
yeah,
meeting.
that's
Okay, that
after.
doesn't help
That's
us.
after town
Okay.
meeting, and
Unless for some reason this gets pushed to the second night of town meeting, which would be the 21st.
It's a busy week.
So on the 12th, we are hoping that the select board will make a decision about which path.
There's been a public hearing advertised for the right of first refusal, there's
Yep.
negotiations going on, so I suspect something will.
it's going to, again, not to, it's going to come to a head.
Yeah, yeah.
There's enough things,
Momentum,
kind
yeah.
of pushing us in that direction, yes.
So I have no desire for another meeting, like zero desire for another meeting, but I don't know how FinCom doesn't weigh in on this.
Yeah, I would advocate that we should, and I would just
You
do
meet
it.
early on the 18th.
I would just do it, I would just do it on the, ahead
Town
of.
meeting 7:30, you meet at 6:30 or 7, whatever,
Yep,
depending how
Yep.
simple or complex it is.
yeah, I would, that would be my recommendation, is to meet at 6:30, or, you know, the day of town meeting.
So my only question is, given we had some discussion tonight about if it's the 500 path, how that might look, if it's the 2.5 million path, how that might look, do the members feel like you will have the information you need a half an hour before a town meeting? I'm comfortable with the conversation we had, I'm pretty clear
Yeah,
on what the
and
two
you'll-
options
and
are, but
we'll
I
have- and we'll
I
have
just don't
more-
want someone to feel like, oh, I have to vote on this, and we
Well,
really don't have
we'll
loads
also
of
have
time.
more data on what that is.
You
too.
have what the board does on the 12th, and then
Yeah,
you
so-
have to decide.
So then is this a funding mechanism?
I think so, I mean, I'm trying to imagine what other twists
Okay.
there could be, but, you know, there's an article for the 18th, it's on the warrant.
Okay.
Something has to be done with that warrant article,
Yep,
even if it's tabled because we have another reason or whatever.
Mhm.
But you're not gonna know that until at least the 12th, and hopefully, and presumably, you have to know on the 12th something.
We don't want to have a Saturday night meeting.
yeah, and again, I think we'll, whether it's, you know, we'll get something back after the 12th, or whatever that is.
Yeah.
And so that we'll have at least a couple days to mull that over,
Right.
outside of what we know now.
Yeah, that's true. You can pick up the phone and ask a
Yeah,
question.
and either something is gonna happen under the article of October, or there's a different path.
Yep.
One of those two things has to happen. Up, down, sideways, doesn't matter, one of those two things has to happen.
Yep.
So you'll know that on the 12th.
Yep,
Okay.
and then we can, yeah, I mean, and so how do folks feel about, you know, meeting ahead of town meeting? Is that okay?
Works for me?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. All right, and so we'll get, you know, kind of more details as far as the method of that as we get closer, so,
I got two of them.
Are we ready?
yeah, we're ready. Let's
Move
do
to
it.
adjourn.
Second.
Thanks, Jeffrey. All those in favor? You're adjourned.
Joe's out the room.